We are live.
Okay, very good. Then I'd like to call this meeting to order. Good evening, everybody. Ms. Widener, if you would please call the roll.
Mr. Dorr?
Here.
Mrs. Evans-Brockett?
Here.
Dr. Hallis?
Here.
Dr. Kohler?
Here.
Mrs. Lofton?
Here.
Mrs. Mayers?
Here.
Mrs. Roberts?
Here.
Dr. Weston?
Here.
Ms. White? Ms. White?
I'm sorry, I thought I'd unmuted. Here.
Thank you. All present.
Thank you. So the recommended action is a motion to approve the agenda as presented. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second, Wade.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Motion passes.
Dr. Hallis, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just
Okay.
a few seconds to pull up the summer programs
I
presentation.
was just going to ask you about that. It's okay. So item 1.04, special presentation regarding summer programs, and I will hand it to Dr. Russell.
Thank you. Mrs. Smith, maybe you can assist me. Is this in the shared drive or did you share it with me?
I believe I did both. It should be in our shared drive. And then I think there's a folder for board presentations, or if you search our shared drive, it's called 2021 Summer Programs. I can share it again too. That might just be easier.
Nope, I haven't. Thank
Got it.
you. Sorry about that. Okay, let me share the screen. Apologize for the delay. So for this evening's presentation, we have Mrs. Smith and Dr. Boyd, who are going to share information on some of the summer programming we typically offer. We like to review that with you each year, as well as some of the programming we are proposing to you we'd be able to offer. So I'll turn it over to Mrs. Smith and Dr. Boyd.
So there's three programs that we really want to share with you this evening. The first one will be ESY, and then I'll talk a little bit about LIFT and some additional ideas that we have, but we'll start with Dr. Boyd for ESY.
Great, thank you, Mrs. Smith. So we've talked about this each year. Again, the requirement is really through IDEA for school districts to offer extended school year programming. It's related to the student's disability. And again, this is a program that extends beyond the typical 180-day school year. There's eligibility criteria that's identified through the IEP team process, and it consists of 7 eligibility factors. So we're in the process of beginning that with our first group of students, which are typically known as the Armstrong group of students. Typically, it is our students with the most intensive special education needs. And the program itself is designed based on IEP goals, and it's meant to support the maintenance of skills. Of course, it's required by IDEA, but we do need to bring it to the school board, the approval of personnel once we post and acquire staffing for that. The next slide gives ESY at a glance. Again, we're planning it to run Monday through Thursday, just like we have done the last several years. We have the student hours, the staff hours here identified, as well as a time for setup of classrooms, a parent meet and greet, and then the opportunity for staff to break down the classrooms. And again, if we are able to, we want to host this program on site and in person for our students. We also anticipate that there will be some students for which we may need to offer a virtual ESY program. Again, it will depend on the type of educational services that the children are being provided during the current school year, and then we will extend those services in the same manner as with which we've been delivering instruction through the school year. We still need to determine which of our buildings that we will host the program in, and of course, we will meet with our maintenance and Mr. Weaver to have conversations about any projects that are taking place that may prohibit us from using some of our schools. So as soon as we know that information, we will be sure to communicate that to the board.
Thank you, Dr. Boyd. The LIFT program, or Learning is Fun, is the next program we'd like to talk about. And this typically has been a program that we have provided to students in our Title I schools of Schweinsville South and PV West. We would like to, however, for this summer, expand this program to really include students in all of our K-8 schools and have that funding partly through Title I and partly through district COVID grant funds so that there's no cost to any of our families, but while still ensuring that those Title I students receive the level of intervention that they need in order to qualify for Title I funding. We would intend to focus on math and English language arts, incorporate some physical activity, some hands-on experiences. And for this summer in particular, the principals would like to work with staff on developing themed units and creating a guiding framework so that if you're a first grader, whomever may be teaching that, they know what those essential skills are that they should be focusing on during these few weeks. We would continue to provide some intervention groups for our Title I students, so again, that they are receiving an extra piece of the program. It does require school board approval, which we would hope to bring to you in March for the actual approval of the program, and then we would post to find the personnel. On the next slide, we mirror the exact same dates as ESY. Our time frame fits inside the ESY times, and we try to, if possible, Dr. Boyd and I try to coordinate the transportation so that we can share the transportation expenses across the two programs. We are targeting on-site small group with whatever health and safety plan happens to be at that time, but we would really like to be able to transition students back to what more of a traditional experience might look like. And again, we would want to do small groups. And our location, similarly to what Dr. Boyd indicated, is still to be determined. And then we do have some other ideas that we just need to work out more of the details and hopefully, again, bring them along to you in March for approval, is considering some theme. I apologize. I think that is my child's school saying they don't have school tomorrow based upon the number. I apologize. So some theme-based weeks that we're looking at the middle level with some STEM-focused or high-interest topics, creative writing. I know they're looking at a shark attack, mad scientist that students could either participate in the morning or in the afternoon. They could be in LIFT in the morning and then stay for more of this theme-based activity in the afternoon. And we're also investigating on-site summer school for our secondary students. The past many years, that has been a virtual program, and we feel like they've had quite a bit enough of virtual at this point. So if we could do that on site, although we may have to do a combination just to ensure that we can provide instruction in all of the particular courses that students may need. And again, we'd like to be able to fund that with our COVID grants at no cost to our families, and would seek your approval in March of the program. And then once we have personnel to associate with it, we bring that back as well. And those are really the summer programs that we're looking at. We're excited, and I have to say the principals have had great ideas, and it seems that our staff has some interesting ideas too, and hopefully we will have enough of them step up to offer this in the summer.
Okay, if no other board member has a question, I just have a real quick one, Mrs. Smith. For those students who do stay that second half of the day, do they bring lunch? Do we have to worry about feeding them? And I'm sure you've already thought of it, but I'm just curious what that we've made sure we've dotted that I and crossed that T.
Yeah, we still have some more of the details to work out, but we have thought about, it is a smaller group than what would typically be in the building. So we could possibly provide some snacks or lunch that they could purchase. I'd need to work with Mrs. Yaksich. However, they could certainly pack as well. So we haven't come to a final decision on that, but we have certainly recognized that for some families, they would prefer to have their child there the full day, even middle schoolers, because of childcare, and that they would need a meal in the middle of the day.
Okay, thank you. Any other board members have questions? I'm not seeing any hands raised.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, comments are accepted on any topic at this time. Just a reminder, if you do make a comment, please let us know where you're from, what municipality, and your name. If you're an employee of the district, what building you work in, and you'll have 3 minutes to make comments. And there'll be a timer. So with that, I do see a hand up. Mr. Ganesh, if you could unmute them. Mrs. Staffaroni, I believe is how it said.
Yeah, hi, good evening. My name is Matt. I'm from Collegeville Borough. I just want to start out by saying thanks to the board for helping to navigate these difficult circumstances and leading our community back to an educational model that is fair for everyone. I have a son in 6th grade at East. I have a daughter in 3rd grade at South Elementary. And as you know, they have not had a normal week of school since March 12th, 2020. But let me tell you what they have done in this time. My son and daughter have played a full season of recreational baseball. My son has played a full season of travel baseball, a full season of AAU basketball and Pop Warner football. And currently both my son and daughter are halfway through basketball seasons right here in the district. And the reason why, I believe, is the leadership at Lower Perk Little League, Collegeville Jaguars, Lower Perk Longhorns, and Perk Valley Youth Basketball found a solution and a path forward to get our kids back to a normal environment and a traditional setting. And that is what I'm asking of you tonight. Continue to provide the virtual option for those who prefer that mode, but it is time to take the next step and get our kids back into school 5 days a week. You've done an admirable job of getting us to this point, but we can't lose out on this whole year. All the data and studies show that kids should be back in school. September will be 18 months between normal school weeks for our kids, which is way too long. I'm confident that this community, the teachers, students, and the staff can take this next step together and provide the best educational model for our kids. Lastly, I've lived this and seen this up close. Every day, my wife wakes up and teaches in-person kindergarten in the Wissahickon School District. It looks different. It hasn't been easy, but those kids see their teacher every day. They see their friends every day. They have in-person specials every day, and they get in-classroom support every day. We can do this in PV. Other organizations locally, other local school districts have found the way. It's hard, but let's find the solution and the best path forward tonight to get our kids back into school every day. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ganesh, if you could unmute Mrs. Stone, please.
Hi, my name is Betsy Stone. I live in Skippack Township. I have a 10th grader at the high school and a 7th grader at Middle School East. I actually wanted to talk about the enrollment report that I saw on the agenda for tonight. As of January 29th, it says that at the high school, we have 772 students who have opted to take the virtual mode. And back in January 4th, we had 554. And sorry about my dog. And one thing I was curious of, and I hope this does come up when that's presented, is if that is reflection, that 772 is a reflection of the 3rd marking period, which starts Wednesday. I think it's still Wednesday with the snow day. or if that's still coming off of the second marking period because the high school made you make a choice. But I also noticed that back in September, when we started, we only had 176 students choosing the virtual option. And that's over a 400% increase in students that have chosen virtual. And I haven't seen anybody reach out to find out why we've had such a huge increase and at the high school level. And I mean, I think at this point, every single level of school needs to be addressed differently, whether it's the elementary school, the high school, or even the middle school, because they're all very, very different situations and very different positions that parents are in. But I did find it interesting that we've had such a large increase at the high school. And, you know, I've talked to some parents and I know some people's reasoning. My own daughter made the decision to just switch to virtual through the third marking period for her own reasons. But it just doesn't feel like anybody from administration or the board is actually finding out from the parents why we're doing this and what the motivation is. And I think that would probably be very helpful for a number of reasons for, you know, you guys to find out, because I do feel that at this point, there's very little trust in this community. Trust with administration, trust with the board, trust with other parents, trust in general. Everything feels like everybody feels like they have to be covert about things, and it's just getting ridiculous and it's out of hand. And I think that the more we could keep things, you know, open and honest and actual, you know, communication, the better it would be, because I know a number of parents don't feel comfortable talking at these meetings. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Ganesh, if you could unmute Mrs. Bruzak, please.
Hi, this is Lauren Bruzak in Collegeville Borough. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Hope everyone enjoyed their snow day today. Thank you for that. You know, it's been quite a long 11 months. And in the last 5 months since we've been back in school, we have really learned a lot. And we have let other school districts around us blaze trails. And we can now use to our benefit the data that they have provided. And with that, we can see between Souderton and Wissahickon and Bucks County and my friends that have kids in New Jersey and Connecticut and Arizona, and they all can't believe that my elementary student is not at school all day. All of those schools are proving that there's no evidence that opening schools causes increased transmission of COVID. And our own COVID dashboard has shown that as well. The recent Duke study that was just released shows it. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends it, even at 3 feet. We can't continue to talk about the problems with opening schools and not acknowledge the problems of not opening schools. A couple years back, the majority of the members on this school board told me that we had to potentially close South because it was an inequitable learning environment. And here we are with 5,000 plus students all learning in different learning environments. Some with parents that are home, some with parents that are not home. We can't just let everything that we have known and fought for as what is good for our kids suddenly not matter anymore. It's time to have a common shared goal of getting our kids back to school. Dr. Russell is an excellent leader, and I trust her to lead us back to school. I hope that you, as the school board of directors, trust her in that also. I believe in us as a community, and I believe that we can do this if we all work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ganesh, if you could unmute Ms. Tweedy, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Tracy Tweedy and I live in Collegeville. My kids attend South and Middle School East. And I would like to comment about the COVID outbreak in the bus drivers and the recent death of one of those drivers. Not everyone may be aware, but one of them has died from COVID. I know there's a lot of talk about opening schools full time, but I just don't see how this would be a responsible move while those in our community are literally dying. Can we just imagine just for a minute, what would have happened to our students if we had full buses? And just think about the number of students that would have been impacted if those buses were full. There are a lot of elementary parents who are very unhappy in their current situation, but they don't have a choice to move to virtual at this time. Those who were temporarily virtual are being forced to return. This seems to be the rallying cry of those who want to open the schools, that everyone has the choice to go virtual. But I want to make it clear that that is not the case at all. And so please, I would urge the board to consider this information when they're making their decisions about where we go in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands. Oh, hold on. Doctor, I'm assuming this is your name. It might have been cut off, but Dr. Campley, is that correct?
Yep, Dr. Campley. I live in Perkiomen Township. And I just feel like it's important to kind of speak up for those that are in hybrid. I know a lot of people are voicing off the record that they are dissatisfied and nervous, but they're not quite comfortable speaking on the record. And I want to speak up for them. We need to think about the social, emotional, and this consistency of the students. The fact that we're hybrid right now is working. Is it the best? No, it's not, but it is working and students are learning. The problem is if we go back full-time face-to-face, we have to work with students on the social emotional piece of what is it like to be back in the school year, which will disrupt learning. Those kids see the news, they know that the numbers are higher than ever. They know that the new mutations are more contagious than ever. To be back in a classroom and have to think about how are they going to have lunch? How are they going to have snacks? It's just not fair to put the kids through that stress, nor the teachers. The other piece is consistency. If the school closes again, or the thing with the buses happens and there's not enough busing, that consistency of pulling kids from full-time face-to-face, making them virtual again, back and forth, that stress on the teachers and the students just isn't fair. At this point, we are halfway through the year. Nothing has changed with COVID. We really need to just maintain consistency and continue with the current model and work on focusing on what will next school year look like. I feel like the ship has sailed on full-time face-to-face return at this point. We need to focus on continuing with hybrid, making it the best we can make it, and figure out next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ganesh, if you would unmute Mrs. Lichtenstein, please.
Hi, my name is Jackie Lichtenstein, and I live in Skippack Township. As a parent of high school students that are currently in the hybrid model, I do want to thank everybody on the board and Dr. Russell for working tirelessly on the continued and constant review of keeping our children in school safely. From what I can tell, the hybrid option seems to be working very well at PV. This week will mark when students in the high school move from 3 cohorts to 2. So I feel with many more families choosing to stay home in the virtual model, this is allowing for those families who seek more days in the building. That said, I hope the families who want to keep their kids in school safely can rely on you to adhere to the guidelines in the attestation form. The reason things are working well for PV is because we have followed the science, proceeded with caution, maintaining 6 feet distance in the classrooms and the cafeteria. If we push to go back now, like with 3 feet or what have you, COVID has nothing has changed, as the previous caller said. So I can't imagine that that is even going to work at this point. And I'm happy to keep my kids home a couple days a week in order for others to be able to also go in a couple days a week. This would not work if all kids were in the school the entire time, like the previous caller said, face to face, packed in the rooms. And as well with the buses, I'm very concerned to hear that a bus driver has died and that another one is currently in the hospital. This is very, very disturbing. And we still need to be vigilant in keeping the kids safe. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Ganesh, if you could unmute Heather, and Heather, I'm sorry you don't have, if you could please make sure you state your last name as well and your municipality. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Heather Gotcho. I'm from Trap Borough. I'm not sure if this is working, but if so, I just wanted to state that the parents that are saying about not wanting to send their kids to school, I value your thoughts and your opinions and what you want to do with your kids, but that's just that. Keep them home and keep them in your virtual mode. Open the school and let us that want to send our kids and want our kids face to face with their teachers, give us that option. Right now, we don't have that option. The ones that want to be home and want to be virtual, they have more of an option than us that want to send our kids. I have 2 elementary kids at South, one who is very bright, very brilliant, and he is falling behind and slipping very quickly. And it's sad to see it. It really is. He needs to be in school. He needs people. He needs his friends. He needs to see his teacher face to face. And I know it's not just my son that is this way with education and how they learn. Opening the schools will benefit all children, all students, because you will have the choice if you want to go or if you want to stay home. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ganesh, if you could unmute Maria, I believe it's Chase.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I thank you for what the board and Dr. Russell has done over to getting us into the position that we are now. First of all, my name is Maria Chase, and I'm sorry, I forgot. I live in Skipback Township, and I have a child, 2 high schoolers, one in 9th grade and one who's a junior. I respectfully ask that we don't give up on a full-time return of school for our high schoolers yet. They have lost so much, and we have to look at the cost of not going back as well as the cost to go back with the social and emotional and what the kids are missing out and the amount of learning and things like that. I respectfully ask that we do a survey and find out what numbers we do have if parents are given a choice of either full-time and virtual versus virtual, just to see where we are at this point and see what is specifically preventing us from going back. Specific items like we can't do this. These are for these reasons. We aren't able to go back full time, and then we could look creatively at trying to solve each one. It's going to be spring, the weather's going to get warmer. We have a lot of options, more creative solutions that we can find. I just hope that we look for what can we do approach, like how can we go back safely? I'm not suggesting that we don't go back safely. I'm just suggesting that we get our kids back in school more than 2 out of 6 days. Well, I know that we're switching, so more than what we have right now. I would love to, even though we do have just one quarter left, assuming the 3rd quarter stays as it is, I just would like to start planning now for a return and for the students to go into the summer with some hope of normalcy in the school year. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Mr. Ganesh, if you could unmute KC, and KC, if you could please state your full name, your municipality, please.
Hi, yes, my name is Kelly Kramer. I am of the Perkiomen Valley Township, Schwenksville, and I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to speak and to share my thoughts. Hands down, thank you to everyone. This goes to the school board, administration, teachers, staff. Thank you. I am a parent of a child at the high school who transitioned this year and a parent at the middle school, West, who transitioned this year. And they've received support. They've received connection with their teachers and their peers. I am also a teacher in a school district that has been open 5 days a week for students and families that need that option. I urge us here in the Perkiomen Valley School District, in the name of social and emotional learning, in the name of mental health and wellness, in the name of being solutions oriented, and really coming back and bringing back to the conversation of equity in our school district for our students and our families, to let's stop debating whether we should or shouldn't be back in school, and let's start developing a plan to get us there. Solutions oriented. We can do this. I know we can, because districts out there have done it. They've done it well. They've done it successfully. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ganesh, if you could unmute Diana McGinn, please.
Hello, thank you. My name is Diana McGinn, and I'm from Perkiomen Township. I'm calling in as a parent of two elementary students. I'm actually a virtual parent, and some would say that I probably shouldn't join this discussion and just, be content with my situation, which I very much am. But as a certified teacher who put time in all my practicums, years of teaching, professional development, certifications, I know what it takes to have a career as a teacher and to keep it. And I hear a lot of discussion about students and what their needs are, but I have yet to hear a single parent speak about a teacher in our school district as they speak, about a principal, about the other adults that are going into the building. And I thank the parents who raised the point of the fact that a bus driver who was driving Perkiomen Valley students to school has died. Her family does not have her. She will not be coming home. And as these people say it, there's other people who are following them whose feelings and priorities I do understand and respect. But I urge you to consider that education is so important. I invested years of my life in it, but lives of people matter the most. People can't die for my children or yours and it be okay with any of us. It's just not acceptable. And so I don't want to hear about a teacher who dies because they are in person. And I know that there are schools operating, but I also know, and I follow closely at a state level. My involvement is not just here in the district. And I can tell you that we have had several school staff members and teachers die in the state of Pennsylvania. It shouldn't take it having to come to Collegeville or Skipback or any of our areas for it to matter to us. And so I'm not trying to insult anybody or debate or anything, but I'm asking you to please recognize that the decisions that Dr. Russell and each of our board members make are not just about your children. When you say stuff like just keep your children home, as somebody who is doing that, I can tell you that my children's virtual teachers, they go to school in a school building every day.
30 seconds.
So I just want to make this clear. Again, as it was stated, I feel like some people maybe, I don't know if they didn't care or didn't hear. People are dying and they shouldn't have to. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands raised. Just waiting. Okay, then I'm going to assume that was the last one and public comment period is closed. Thank you, everybody. Over to reports, sorry. Item 2.01 is the student liaisons report. Ms. McGovern and Mr. Smith, if you would, please.
Hi, everyone. I just decided to use my time tonight to give my own opinion on the matter of a virtual, hybrid, or full in-person school model. And I, for one, and as well as the time I spent on this board, have talked to a lot of students about what they think. And I know for myself and a lot of those students, we yearn for the ability to go back to school in a 5-day in-person, face-to-face schedule. I've also learned that there is a process and a safety protocol that we must do and must reach to get to that point. And I know that especially the members of this board try every meeting and every day to get us back to that point. So I'd like to thank you for that. But I would like to say that we want to get there. I want to get there. And I hope we can get there. But I think we have a very unique case. We have a very large high school. We have multiple middle schools and a lot of elementary schools. So I think that we have to look at this as our case scenario. And I think that the school board members do a very good job of doing that, looking at the small pieces and making the best informed decisions based on science that we have available at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. McGovern? I'm actually not seeing her in the audience. So with that, item 2.02, which is the president's report. And I don't have a lot to say, except obviously we as a board express our condolences regarding the bus driver from STA and her passing. It is an unfortunate thing that happens now with a pandemic. And the only other thing I'd want to add before turning things over to Dr. Russell is to sort of reinforce what Mr. Smith said. I know much of the public debate is, very strongly on one side or another. And we as a board, I don't think anybody wants to keep children out of school. I think that the real struggle is getting there. And this board regularly talks about it and thinks about it and tries to figure out the ways to do it. And the only other thing I would sort of add to ask people to think about is it is very easy sort of to say Souderton's open, Wissahickons open, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a certain truth to that, but there's also some realities that schools are configured differently. And some districts, a certain percentage have opted to go to virtual more so than in other districts. And it's a complex, convoluted problem. And I just want to make it clear to people that I have never heard any of my colleagues, nor would I express the idea that, we somehow want to keep children out of school. That is a charge that's frequently made, and it's just simply not true. But in getting children back to school, there are an awful lot of nuts and bolts questions that need to be answered. And we're trying to answer them. I mean, if we think back to when we first had this debate, and it was just as tense as the debate we're having right now. And I can remember, members of the public screaming at me, and my stance was the same one it would be right now. That is, my question's not open or don't open. My question is, can we open? How do we open? And as a result, there's a process that needs to be followed. There's a lot of questions that need to be answered, not just getting kids into classrooms, but making sure buildings get cleaned, making sure students can get fed. And, just a simple example of this, what we've done so far is we haven't charged students for lunch. If we bring more students back, there's a budgetary consideration we have to think about, because we probably still don't want students punching in their account numbers. So, it's my way of sort of saying, please just bear with us. We are most definitely trying to find a way through this. It is just not an easy affair. And many people's emotions run high on this, and it's frustrating. I'm frustrated. I have kids in the district. So does everybody else on this board. And we're trying. We are really desperately trying. And with that, item 2.03, the superintendent's report. Dr. Russell.
Thank you, Dr. Hallis. I will ultimately end up echoing some of what you have just shared and some of what our public has shared in their comments. But let me begin with some recognition for the contributions in the volunteer service on the Martin Luther King Day of Service earlier this winter in January. Some student activities that are up and running as ways to engage our students differently in the school setting and ways that we hope will nurture their social and emotional well-being. I want to talk about the attestation form, the updates that occurred very recently to some of the guidance that we are obligated to follow. And then I want to talk about the possibilities and the criteria we need to think about as we continue to consider a shift to a traditional mode of learning. And at some point, we will return to a traditional mode of learning. The question is when and how we do that, as Dr. Hallis mentioned. So the Mlk Day of Service occurred in January, and I'll include this video for you, but we had some of our Safe Collective students create a video that actually was educational and it was instructive in nature. I'll just play a few seconds of it. So the students go on, it's a 3.5-minute video, and you may want to view it later on. They did a really nice job pointing out some of the contributions of Dr. King, as well as explaining the meaning of those contributions. And these are our students that are working with Ms. Jerry Brown, one of our consultants this year, supporting us in realizing, developing a greater awareness and how we can be most equitable and inclusive. On the Mlk Day of Service, we had a variety of activities occurring on our high school campus. We did have some volunteer service out in the hospital, Phoenixville Hospital, and a couple of other settings. But we had the Lions Club here and an effort to collect prescription glasses that would then be reallocated to individuals that need them. We had some monetary contributions. We had contributions of winter clothing to be donated. These are our sinus students. And they have been partnering with us on this day for a couple of years now and supporting, and this was a very cold day for the individuals that volunteered and were outside all day. For those that have been participating, they've been a nice partner in this work on the Mlk Day of Service, collected some books, wrote some nice notes, and then we also collected a lot of clothing. I did see specifically Mrs. Lofton and Dr. Hallis out there, and they were out there for most of the days. To those of you that were there for any amount of time in any space, thank you for that. And I thank our students, they did a nice job. What other activities are happening for our students? Sports are up and running, and our students are obligated to wear masks as they compete this year, except for when they're in the pool. So you can see students preparing to dive and participate in a swim meet or a competition. We have students playing basketball at the middle school and high school level, both boys and girls. They're also wrestling, and they're all obligated to wear masks. We're limited to the number of spectators that can be in any one of our facilities. And again, all must wear masks and socially distance. To date, things are going okay. We also have clubs up and running, some different sorts of activities. This is the Robotics Club. This is the high school group of students. There's a little video here. You may also want to click on this and view this at a later date. But again, it's to showcase to you some of what is happening for our students and helping to keep them engaged in school and feeling somewhat normal, again, in a safe and healthy manner. These are some high school or middle school activities, Students are invited to go out and play some basketball during lunch. Again, they're wearing masks at all times. And then there are some after-school activities that have been organized at both middle schools, whether it's jumping rope or dance competitions or creative cooking. Our students are invited to participate in some after-school activities that are intended to provide them with some normalcy and some activities that they really have a strong interest in or that they want to learn more about. So these have been some nice activities and well attended by our middle school students. Some additional activities here, you can click on the links, the Facebook links that are included here, showcase some of the music ensembles and the performances that have been captured and posted on Facebook. And our music teachers have done a really nice job in being creative in figuring out how do they showcase what our students can do, since they can't hold those typical concerts we're used to attending during the winter. Stay tuned for what might happen in spring. They've got some good ideas for that. So let's shift to this attestation form, this document that was presented to us by the state. And questions are really, what does the attestation form mean for school districts? We talk about this. We had a lot of new terminology with this pandemic, from social distancing to attestation forms to some of the other new and more common now terminology we use. But this attestation form that was signed by the district and submitted to PDE attested to the fact that we would follow their guidelines as well as uphold the masking order. And those guidelines indicated to us positive COVID case thresholds that, if they were met in specific schools, meant we had to shift to all virtual. That's what the attestation form indicated to us, and we were obligated to follow those recommendations. So even though the term recommendations is used in terms of responses and shifting to virtual, we were obligated to do that. Now, last week, the state changed the directions and the guidance provided through the attestation form. We still have to uphold that mask order. We still must always wear face coverings when in school, and that's all individuals. However, if we hit the positive count thresholds that are indicated in those charts, and I'll show you that in a second, we don't automatically need to shift to virtual, and instead we need to confer with our local health department, which is the Montgomery County Office of Public Health, and they will guide us. They've been working closely with Mrs. Meg Lewis as our pandemic liaison. They know what's happening in our schools. They'll talk to her about the detailed circumstances of the number of positive cases, contact tracing, etc. And they will then guide us and direct us as to what we must do in response to hitting those positive case counts. So we're not obligated to do what was in that original chart. And again, this is only really coming into play when we're in the substantial level of transmission, which means we've got pretty high data. We've got a high incidence rate per 100,000 residents. We're still over 100, and we've got a percent positivity. It's either or, it's not and, but it's or, a percent positivity over 10. Thankfully, in Montgomery County, that's come down now. We're under 10% in terms of the percent positivity. However, when we're in that substantial mode, we've got to pay attention to what the Office of Public Health tells us what to do if we hit a certain number of positive cases. So there's a lot of details to put together in our responses, but the effort is really to support schools hosting on-site instruction, even though we're in that substantial level of transmission where those data are pretty high and the burden of virus is still pretty heavy in the community around us. The state is trying to support us with this guidance so that we can maintain on-site instruction, at least at some level. And that's what we're doing. So this is the original form that was just recently changed January 28th. The legislation changed at the state level. So again, not automatically obligated to close our school or shift to fully virtual. That's what that means. And instead, we'll talk to the Office of Public Health. Not only do we follow that attestation form, but we pay attention to the criteria that were board approved in November. And these were updated and revised from the first set of criteria, because as we move through this pandemic, we continue to learn more about this virus and what we can do to mitigate its spread, what we need to look out for. So we have called attention to a certain positivity rate or incidence rate. We've also now paid very careful attention to evidence regarding linked transmission in our schools. And thankfully, we haven't had any evidence of link transmission in our schools based on how we contact trace. Very little transmission in schools has occurred in Montgomery County. And that's a really good thing. That's encouraging for us as we see more of the schools around us bring more students back. We're excited to increase the number of students that will be on site and their frequency at the high school this week. And I know a lot of those students are excited. We have PPE that will get us through the year, although we're looking at some additional supplemental PPE. I'll talk about that in a minute. We're doing okay with personnel. We don't have a lot of wiggle room with our staffing. But right now we have a teacher for every group of students, very little substitutes in our pool. And that's a challenge for districts across Montgomery County, really across the Commonwealth. So anybody with a degree who's interested in substituting, we're going to try and emphasize that opportunity on our website to see if we can attract some individuals who may be interested in substituting. The requirements and the qualifications to serve as a substitute in public schools has changed over the years. So we want to see if we can recruit some additional individuals. We do have that on our website. We're going to try and emphasize that a little bit. And again, as I mentioned, we continue to learn a lot about this virus. We pay attention to that new information and the information from our guiding agencies. Current data, you can see that the percent positivity has decreased a little. Incident rate is still very high. It's coming down though. It's been higher. Hospitalizations are coming down as well. So there's a downward trend. We're encouraged to see that. This is specific, these data are specific to Perkiomen Valley School District and based upon the 6 municipalities. The Office of Public Health provides this directly to superintendents. And again, it's another metric we can look at. This represents the incidence rate as of January 21st. That's the downside of these data. They're behind by more than a week or so. However, you can see what the trending of the incidence rate is looking like for the district, and that's based on all 6 municipalities, and the same with the positivity. You get a sense of where we are as a district back on January 21st. So again, this takes us back a ways. However, you get a sense of how the data are trending. We're moving in the right direction. That's encouraging. This evening, our board will be presented a revision to the health and safety plan, and we may have more that we would like to present to you in the near future as we think about bringing our students back in a traditional mode. Again, whether that's during the second half of the school year or it's in the upcoming school year, we need to think about health and safety as we would introduce more students into the school setting. This evening, we'll present to you statements that we would like to incorporate that would afford us the ability to bring parents in for kindergarten registration. And right now, we don't have any volunteers or really visitors spending time in our buildings. So we just want to be very clear and open about that, transparent, and have that represented in our health and safety plan. We'll talk more about that through the agenda, but this guides us right now. Our health and safety plan guides us, and our staff, our students have been diligent in upholding these guidelines. And the vaccine is being deployed. We're excited about that. Some of our staff have shifted into phase 1A. They've qualified based upon their role, and maybe they've qualified based upon their age or a medical condition, but we're excited. We've got lots of staff that have found, they've found the time to have, they've scheduled appointments and they've been able to secure that first dose, and they'll work towards that second dose. So we're excited to get that moving and really hopeful that Dr. Arkush, the commissioner and lead for the Office of Public Health, is able to secure an increased number of doses for educators in Montgomery County, as well as collaborate with other health departments to secure additional doses for counties across the state to support educators. So let's talk about shifting to a traditional mode of learning. And again, I want to echo some of what Dr. Hallis just mentioned a few minutes ago. At the beginning of the year, when we started to talk about how we were going to implement our models to bring students back into school and to really initiate the school year, it was always with the idea that we would return to a traditional mode of learning. And early on, in my naive thinking, I suggested by the second semester, we would be back in a traditional mode. That was the goal. We were aiming for second semester, we'll be back in a traditional mode. As we approached the holidays in the fall and the winter holidays, it became very clear we weren't going to make that target. So the question now becomes, what is the target? What's a reasonable target to return our students to a traditional mode of learning? And we are aware, and you're hearing some of that this evening, that there are three different groupings within our community that feel strongly about the three different modes of instruction we've got up and running. We've got the virtual group. They're really comfortable with the virtual mode of learning for their children. We've got individuals who are advocating strongly to have their children back in school, full days, 5 days a week. And then we have the individuals who are really comfortable and feel as if the hybrid is the just right balance based upon the circumstances of the pandemic and affording their children a level of on-site school. And I certainly appreciate the views on the part of all three groups and the reasons for those views. However, at some point, we need to get back to a traditional mode of learning for our students. That's how we do school best. Students in school 5 days a week, all day, for the majority of students, not all students, but for the majority. And at some point, whether it's this spring or in the upcoming fall, we need to plan for what that's going to look like. So what are the criteria that must be in place to support, in a way that our board and community families will be comfortable, a traditional mode of learning? And you're starting to see what that looks like around us. You're starting to see, and some of those school districts were mentioned this evening. Yes, Souderton has students back. Wissahickon has elementary students. Upper Merion just moved their elementary students back in. Springford has their elementary students in and is preparing to move high school students or secondary level students back in. Methacton is also headed in the direction of elementary. So we're starting to see other schools around us introduce more students more frequently on site. And I would like us to aim for the same thing. And I have presented in some conversations, either at wellness or as part of task force, the idea that maybe we aim for March 22nd, the beginning of the third trimester for our elementary students and the fourth marking period for our secondary students. And that's based upon advice from our guiding agencies that right now recommend we consider spring as a time to bring students back to school in greater numbers. More of the vaccine will be deployed, more individuals will be vaccinated, and the warmer weather is actually more conducive to people being together in a setting. The virus doesn't hang as long in the air when it's warm as much as it would when it's cold. So some of our guiding agency representatives, Dr. David Rubin of CHOP, Dr. Valar Cush, recommend aim for spring. That seems to be right now a reasonable target. I would like us to aim for something this spring, and we can present to the board the criteria and the details that it wants to feel comfortable in being able to take that step. If it doesn't happen this spring, then we need to prepare for the fall. So the work will be important, whether it allows us to move forward this spring, and that's my recommendation, or it holds us off to the fall. There is some conversation about that social distancing recommendation, which is strong from the Office of Public Health to stick to 6 feet. The state indicates 6 feet to the maximum extent feasible. We have really stuck to 6 feet. And there are schools around us that are not necessarily sticking to 6 feet, but are starting to get somewhere close to that. And in some of those settings, that's actually the case. We need to talk about that and where our comfort level is. Right now, the schools around us, again, have not shown evidence of linked transmission with the situations or the models they've got up and running. So we need to talk about social distancing, and whether or not the Office of Public Health is going to relax their recommendation is yet to be seen. We don't know that yet. They may, They're not ready to today. There is the idea that maybe we double up masks if we introduce more students into the school setting. There's also the idea that we get plexiglass for each of our students, and we have quotes out to get a sense of cost. What would it cost to get a plexiglass shield for each of our students' desks? We have some, we have a lot. We don't have enough for every single student. We have some in place that we use in different settings. The idea that we would get more to, again, provide an extra layer of protection is something we want to look at. Again, if we can take this step to a traditional setting. As Dr. Hallis mentioned, we need to review our cleaning protocols in detail. If we have more students in the building more frequently, how do we get to that cleaning? How do we provide food service? What do we need to think about with air quality? And what will the advice be from our guiding agencies as we move forward? And again, the data are being gathered and we're observing what's happening around us and what can happen for students. And I'd like to ask us to think about that. So the admin team is working diligently to get answers to some of these questions and to provide the details that I believe the board would be interested in hearing before consideration can be made to support aiming for that target of March 22nd for elementary and April 12th for secondary. We'll continue the conversations at the Wellness Committee. We have a task force that's working collaboratively to also address some of these questions and tease out the details. And we'll certainly continue the conversations with our staff, particularly leadership and in public. And we are planning to do a parent survey once we have a little bit more information about what might be. We all recognize, I do anyway, that over the summer, there were a couple of surveys, and those surveys, the number of surveys, kind of ended up leaving a bad taste in the mouths of some. When we are ready to question our parents, it is with some detail about what we would like to propose and whether or not they would be supportive of their child participating. So hypothetically, if we're going to implement a traditional model as of March 22nd, elementary parents, would you commit your child to this model, or would you want your child to remain in a virtual setting? And what models will we offer if we shift to a traditional model? We're even thinking about that next fall. If we open school, again, hypothetically, in a traditional mode, will we still need to operate a virtual mode? That's been posed to me by some parents, and the administrative team is thinking about that and considering what we might do, how we might do it, because it would be what's best for kids and our families. So with that, lots more to come. I would like to present some greater detail to the board next week and continue the conversation about, again, aiming for that date, those 2 dates later this spring, and learning from the board what it is you need to feel comfortable setting those as targets. And with that, Dr. Hallis, that ends my report.
Thank you. Mrs. Mayers has a question.
Excuse me. Thank you. I have a couple questions. My first question is, I know that Dr. Russell, you went and a few other, I believe, administrators and possibly a teacher went and observed Souderton High School. And I wanted to know what you see as the difference between how Souderton High School seems to be effectively implementing full-time school, what the difference is compared to PV High School. What would we need as a school district to get there and be successful in mitigating the virus as it seems that they are doing?
Number one, they're not hard and fast 6 feet of social distancing in all aspects of the operations of their high school. And so that means in classroom settings, that means in the lunchroom. And because they have students that are closer than 6 feet, they have a lot of quote unquote close contacts when there's a positive case. So a downside of bringing students back into the setting where you have students at times closer than 6 feet is that you will have quarantining on the part of these students. because we stick to 6 feet, we're very strict about it. We have very few, if any, close contacts. I think we had some of our first ones this past week out at West. We've been really careful about that. And have had students, very few students, end up being qualifying, if you will, as close contacts. So very little quarantining. So what Souderton does is and there's some other private schools that do the same thing. They live stream those students in, similar to what we're doing in the hybrid model, as they are fulfilling their quarantine period.
Thank you. So that's primarily the main difference. It's just the spacing of the students from one another.
Yeah, I would say that is the main difference. They're masking. They have strict cleaning protocols in place. They have wipes in their classrooms as we do. The students all do have a plexiglass shield. So I should mention that at the elementary level, not at the high school, but at the elementary level, every student has a 3-sided plexiglass shield on his or her desk. And that was true in the private school that we went to as well. That's another major difference in the lower grades, but at the high school, that was not something that I would call out as a difference. It didn't exist.
Okay, thank you. And then I have another question. So the Office of Public Health might relax their recommendation. I wanted to know if Mr. Subers could comment on the use of the word recommendation in the attestation form, and that's the guidelines, because it says recommendation, and I'm just trying to understand if that's something, what the legal consequences for us as a school district are.
Sure, I can comment on that. The attestation form was executed, as you probably know, in response to an order of the Secretary of Health on November 24th. And that order indicated that for any districts located in a county in which there was a substantial level of incidence or substantial incidence rates, that in order to provide any form of in-person instruction, including hybrid instruction, the district was required to execute the attestation ensuring implementation of mitigation efforts. And that attestation contains 2 representations. One is that you will comply, as Dr. Russell stated, with the mandate on universal face coverings. And the second one relates to compliance with the recommendations for pre-K to 12 schools following identification of cases of COVID-19. That's not the general recommendations regarding phase reopening. It's not the recommendations regarding instructional models. It's a specific guidance regarding what schools need to do following identification of cases of COVID. And, and it's again, a chart based on the number of cases and what you need to do in response to those cases. So the attestation doesn't commit the district to following the other recommendations related to phase reopening, related to instructional models. And those are the recommendations which include the 6 feet physical or social distancing requirement. And I would also note that the PDE's guidance regarding social or distancing, or social or physical distancing, does include the language where feasible. And in fact, the Montgomery County's written guidance contains similar language. So I hope that addressed your question.
Thank you. It does. I have one last just comment, but thank you very much, Mr. Subers. So in our health and safety plan on page 13, just as you said, Mr. Subers, our health and safety plan says 6 feet to the maximum extent feasible. So to my mind, it seems like we as a district can make changes when we see and continue to be told that there's no evidence or very little evidence of link transmission in the schools. I'm advocating that we move forward in a more timely manner than April 12th for the 7th and 12th graders.
Okay. Dr. Kolar?
Thank you. So Dr. Russell, I think that it's great to have some target dates in mind. Like you said before, initially we had a target of halfway through the year. Unfortunately, we couldn't meet that target. So I like the idea of setting a target, but knowing that it's not something set in stone. My question is, as we're looking towards the spring and weather getting warmer, have we looked into setting up some outdoor learning spaces and what that might cost? I wonder if that might be a better use of funds than plexiglass, because I know there's been some inconsistent research about plexiglass and whether it's really helpful. In fact, some research I've read said it can contain the germs if it's not cleaned properly, or, air particles still go over the plexiglass. It's not necessarily the best way to keep the virus from transmitting, but I wonder if we're looking at spring, have we thought about utilizing outdoor spaces, maybe setting up something similar to what we see in some of the colleges around the country doing. And I know we can't always rely on the weather, but it might be something worth looking into.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kolar. And we were actually just talking today about how dirty some of the plexiglass gets. And while students might be able to wipe their desk, they can't really clean plexiglass. We don't want them spraying with Windex and using towels to wipe them. So I appreciate the point about how dirty it might get. That did not come up in our conversations with other schools, but it came up as an admin conversation this morning, as a matter of fact. There are suggestions on the part of just at Safety and Operations, some of our principals, for outdoor classroom settings. I don't know when they would actually be implemented, but something actually more formal. And Dr. Moss has talked about the idea of extending the cafeteria out to the patio behind the current cafeteria. There's a big cement pad. As the weather gets warmer, we can open windows more in classrooms. And it's my understanding from the research that even opening windows makes a significant difference in air quality for individuals in a congregate or classroom setting. And as you indicate, when the weather gets nicer, we're more likely to go outside. And most of our teachers and students certainly enjoy getting outside. So absolutely, we can think more about that and clearly define more of the possibilities that might exist at each level to do that. Thank you.
Hey, Mrs. Evans-Brockett.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if, Dr. Russell, you recently shared with the board information from Springford School District on the number of times that they've had to close for cleanings. And it was quite a few among the different schools. And I know they had a case of in-school transmission at their one center. Is it possible, or do you have that information for Souderton or Wissahick and these other school districts that have gone more time in school face-to-face with less social distancing?
I don't have that, but I can get that for the board, just so you have that as additional reference. I'm happy to do that. There's hearsay on my part from what I've heard about Souderton, but I'd rather get the details as I did from Springport. I'm happy to get that and provide it for you.
That would be helpful, yeah, because obviously the board has gotten lots of emails and from teachers from these other districts and reports that that the reporting may not be as good and those types of things. So I'd like the actual data rather than just relying on that hearsay.
So number of times they've had to close based on hitting that threshold, positive case counts according to the attestation form chart. Okay. Yep. Okay.
Mrs. Roberts, you have a question?
I don't really have a question. I just,
I think that it's important to remember that a lot of these school districts that are being touted as being completely and fully open are not completely and fully open. I know that Solderton offers virtual learning. I'm pretty sure that Springford has also, nobody has just thrown the doors open and allowed people to come in and without restriction. So even in the Solderton School District, they are offering a virtual option in order to accommodate the parents who don't feel safe and comfortable sending their kids to school. And especially since they are more lax in regards to social distancing than we are. I personally would like to see school completely and totally open. I really would. I just don't think that it's practical to, I mean, and I may very well be wrong, especially with these new mutations. The idea of putting a hard date on when we're going to do that may be a pipe dream because we don't really know what's going to happen. I would really personally like to see all of our adult staff vaccinated before we consider opening the schools, because even if there isn't evidence of much transmission in the school between the students and much transmission in the school or much serious illness in the school among the students, we still have adult staff. And how is the vaccination program going? Because I know I've been trying to get a vaccine appointment and it just can't be done. So I'm wondering how many of our teachers are vaccinated at this point and how much of our staff is vaccinated at this point to be able for our staff to be able to safely enter the building.
Mrs. Roberts, I just want to mention, I appreciate you calling out the virtual option that continues to exist in those districts. And my recommendation would be that we maintain the same. I wouldn't want to abandon that and force individuals into just one mode. But again, you know, we've attempted to work with our families to the degree that it's logistically possible. I would want to continue to do that. So I appreciate you mentioning that. And I too wanted to echo that for Perkiomen Valley. We can get you the information on what number of our staff and therefore percentage so far are vaccinated. And we've had individuals from all of our employee groups actually get a first dose, whether it's our custodial staff or maintenance or teachers, paraprofessionals. So we can have that information for you, and that'll give you a sense of how far along we are. We have a long way to go, but we have had a nice number get their appointments and actually head down to Montgomery County Community College to get tested.
Thank you very much. That's important because adults are definitely more at risk than children in this. So we can't just think about the students, because if we have students and no teachers, there's no school, you know, so.
Right. And you know, we're concerned about our teachers and what it is they would look for as we discuss returning to a traditional mode. Again, whether it's this spring or in the fall, that matters and needs to be a part of our conversations, certainly. And the other thing that I want to mention is most of our positive cases among students have occurred among students who are off-site and not on-site, which again is a reason why I'm coming to you with this recommendation. We're not seeing link transmission in our schools. That's a really good thing. And the majority of positive cases are occurring in students that are virtual, as opposed to those that are coming into our buildings for some number of times. So I think that's important, and that seems to be a trend. I can get you some more specifics on that for next week as well.
Thank you, Dr. Russell.
You're welcome.
Mrs. Evans-Brockett, I know you have your hand up again. Do you mind if I just jump in and ask a question? Because it's simply, thanks. it kind of piggybacks on what Mrs. Roberts has said, and that way it'll keep Dr. Russell from sort of having to circle back and add in. And it's this one question that's been sort of nagging at me because I can't get an answer to it. But before that, let me also say, I know I have, and I know Dr. Weston have contacted, local elected officials to advocate that teachers be moved from 1B to 1A. I don't know if any other board members have, but it's I just want to point it out because you do have board members trying to figure this out. I don't think it'll move much because there seems to be a problem with the vaccine supply. But back to the issue at hand, I try to read everything I can about the pandemic in light of figuring out how to get school open. And one question that still remains unanswered, and I saw it mentioned again in the New York Times last week, is that, there's very little student-to-student transmission. We know younger age students are less likely to contract the virus for whatever reason, we don't know yet. But I keep reading data that young students are 60% more likely to transfer the virus than an adult. So we're bringing students back, and then we're putting adults in the rooms with them. So, if anybody else knows of more data, more detail about this, just because, again, and I bring it up because I do want everybody on all sides of the issue to understand the complexity of this question, that we as a board have to think the whole thing through. And I've just seen this cited again and again and again throughout the pandemic, but I'll be darned if I can find the sort of research on that question that I can find on all other sorts of things related to the pandemic. And just as a public official trying to do my due diligence and make sure if we do this, we do it right, that, I say this to you, Dr. Russell, but to any of my colleagues on the board, if anybody comes across something that sheds some light on this, please bring it forward. Because I have looked and looked and looked and looked and looked, and I brought it up just because it sort of tailed with what Mrs. Roberts was talking about. And I think it's it's yet another question we have to think about as we try to figure out how to open schools. So sorry, that took longer than 30 seconds, but go ahead, Ms. Evans-Brockett.
Yeah, actually, Mrs. Roberts reminded me of some other data that you had gotten us from Springford, Dr. Russell, that would be helpful. You had some percentages of students in person versus virtual.
Yep.
Actually, I was really surprised with Springford. Only 62% of their elementary and 45% of their secondary are in person. So they were really able to stick close to that 6 feet in distance. So I'm curious if you can get that information from the other districts that are doing in person as well. Because I think, that comes back to our district. Right now, we have higher numbers that are doing hybrid. Would that change if we went completely in person versus virtual? I don't know, but that would be helpful information to have.
Yep, I can get that. Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Yep, sure. And Dr. Howes, just to go back to your question, I'll see if I can find some research or tap into some of what might exist from the county to provide the board. Happy to do that.
It's one I've seen again and again and again, and it's a factor that we've got to consider. And I'm not going to pretend I have the answer. I don't know the answer, and I've tried like the devil to find it.
Yeah.
So, Mrs. Mayers had her hand up, and then Dr. Kolar.
Thank you. I was just wondering if we have a time frame for when we might be sending out a survey, because that would give us some of this information that Mrs. Evans-Brockett just alluded to, just as far as percentages and choices for families when they know what their choice would be. What's the administration's thought on a timeline for that?
So my thoughts are this month, and I was interested to hear some of the questions and the thoughts on the part of the board tonight in really coming on a little bit stronger with a recommendation to try and shift to a traditional model this spring. I wanted to get your thoughts and learn from you what additional information you need. I'd like to come back with you with more details for the 8th, next week's meeting. And then if we can land on criteria that you believe are comfortable and will guide us appropriately in taking a step into a traditional mode, presuming we meet them, we can administer a survey and we can learn from our families if these are the circumstances, if we meet these criteria and offer these modes, what will you choose? So that we would know that before coming to you in March for the board meetings. That would be a general timeline so that we can then get the approval to actually take a step forward later in March. I mean, it sounds like it's far off. It's really not far off when we consider the number of weeks and the work to do. So, but that's the tentative timeline in my mind.
Okay, Dr. Kohler, if you would, please.
So my question's related to the survey also, so that worked out well. I was just thinking in terms of, Mrs. Evans-Brockett's question about other districts and their numbers in terms of when they had to choose between all in or virtual. I think they saw their virtual numbers rise. And I wonder if a lot of that is due to that forced choice between one or the other, that all in or all out mentality, whereas we've offered a hybrid that was, like you said, a good compromise of the two for many parents who aren't quite comfortable one or the other. So when we do the survey, I'd really like to see if there's some questions that could tease that out, because I don't want parents to feel like they're forced into, the lesser of two evils, but that they truly do have a reasonable choice for their families. So I don't know what that would look like, but when you're developing the survey, if there's some way we could try to answer that question for our families.
Okay, I appreciate the feedback. Thank you. And I know that we've worked hard to avoid feeling like we're forcing families. We've tried to offer them choice and a comfort level in getting their kids back in school. So we'll work on that as we pose the questions and think about how we accommodate.
Okay, Ms. White, please.
Hi. So to follow up on with Dr. Carlar's comment about, a forced choice, back in the very beginning of all of this, during the task force meetings over the summer, I felt very strongly that our survey should really be in or out. Which one do you choose? And I felt like that would give us a more clear picture of what people's true intentions were. Ultimately, obviously, we went with the compromise position of a hybrid, which I was not in favor of for upbeat reasons. But in hindsight, I think it did allow and does allow the flexibility and a level of comfort for the families that are making a compromise for their kids to be in the buildings part of the time, and obviously allowing us to adhere to the attestation form in the 6 feet. So my point in saying that is that I think ultimately one of the lessons learned from the summertime to now is that although I think that we tried to set expectations and let people have a full understanding of what each mode would look like, I think that there is a contingent of families that really didn't really understand what they were choosing and what all that involved. So to Dr. Kolar's point, I think without setting expectations as to what a quote unquote full traditional model looks like versus a virtual model, especially for those families having to choose from a hybrid mode right now, potentially, we need to be very, very clear as to traditional is not traditional. And I think that use of the word traditional is a little misleading, because that's just not where we are as a society anymore at this point, certainly. So no one going back into a building 5 days a week is going to be going back into a traditional learning model. And I think that needs to be said and reiterated and really documented in a way that parents can actually go back and look at if my child chooses to be quote unquote traditional, these are the things that they're going to have to adhere to. Because in a lot of the emails that we've been receiving from parents with concerns and this push to go back to normal, normal is not a choice for anybody right now. And so in one breath, they want to go back to normal. And then in the second breath of the email, very often they're complaining about the mitigation measures that are in place in a hybrid scenario, such as, the cafeteria and the lunchroom, and they can't talk to their friends. And that's the reason that they want to stay home, is because they don't want to be involved in, having to deal with not enough people in the classroom, et cetera. I mean, these are just all random examples, of course, but I think that without the expectation of the sacrifice, we're doing a disservice to the families that think that once we achieve this full-time goal, things are going to be status quo. And that is it's just very far from the truth. That's all.
Thank you, Ms. White. And I mean, to your points, I just want to mention, we have to come up with new terminology to exchange for that traditional term or normal. You're right. And we have an instructor from another district who mentioned that very point in our task force meeting, that traditional isn't traditional. And when students are in school 5 days a week for full days, it looks different than what it looked like before March 12th last year. So I appreciate the emphasis on making sure parents understand that and know exactly what they're choosing. And the other thing that I'd like to point out is that when we talk about mitigation measures that will be in place and continue to be in place in our schools, I don't see them ending anytime soon. It's my hope that the community continues to take them seriously and that the mitigation measures are upheld by all, because the lack of upholding those mitigation measures does affect our students, and it can affect what happens in school. So if we can come together and work together as a community and commit to those mitigation measures, it will help us all move this forward sooner rather than later.
Okay, Ms. McGovern?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
We can.
Thank you. I really appreciate all of the work that you put in, Dr. Russell, the administration and the board. And I just wanted to go back to Dr. Kolar's mention of the fact that at that other school, sorry, I can't remember the name of it right now, but that the numbers rose when they were giving that kind of final choice. And I hate to sound like a broken record here, but I think it's important to try, and I'm sure this is something you've considered, but to just keep in mind that the more likelihood that we have students going virtual, the more likely it is we can have some students stay in and maintain those things like 6 feet in the classroom and things like that. But at some point that might become problematic because we are trying to get all students back in school at some point whenever that becomes safe. So, I think a lot of virtual students are staying home because of safety reasons rather than want. And I just feel like that might be something important to consider for the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McGovern. I'm not seeing any other board hands up. So I'm going to assume there's no other questions. Do you have anything else to add, Dr. Russell?
I don't, just thanks for the feedback. Very helpful on the prompting with the questions. And next week we'll come back to you with more information and answers to those questions. And I'll make every effort to provide the board in their weekly communication with answers to some of those questions. But I appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to item 2.04, the solicitor's report. Mr. Rubers, do you have anything to report?
I do not.
Okay. Item 2.05 is board and district committee reports. Does any board member have anything to add? If you would, Ms. White. Ms. White.
I just wanted to make a request that within these committees, I know that a lot of times there are multiple meetings during the week, and for one reason or another, there are times that we can't fulfill our obligation on an assigned committee. So I just want to formally request that when there is a reason for an absence of one of us 9 to not be able to participate in an assigned meeting, if you could send an email to all of us. That way, one of us, it could be like a first come, first served, sub could pop in there. I know that there have been some times that, especially in this new Zoom mode, that unfortunately only assigned meeting participants can be panelists. And a lot of times, then there's an open spot. So I just wanted to make that a formal request to my colleagues on the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other board members?
Dr. Hallis, can I offer comment?
Sure.
I wanted to call out that we did have a task force meeting last week, and I will continue to meet with smaller subgroups of the task force in an effort to give individuals a voice. It was a fairly large group in its efforts to be representative of our community. And as a way to make sure that I hear the voices, I will be meeting with the parent subgroup as well as the teacher subgroup in the next couple of days. And I'll follow up with the board. But the task force was organized last summer as, again, a representative working group, a focus group, to try and get those plans for reopening schools developed, and also the health and safety plan that was eventually submitted to the board. The other piece of information I'd like to call out is that the PV Partners for Equity and Inclusion group is not really a committee. However, it is a community group that meets. We have a meeting Thursday night. And I'm excited to announce that we have an opportunity to learn more about the National Society of Black Engineers, and we'll have some representatives who in turn advise chapters of this group. And we hope to be invited to be able to start a chapter here in Perkiomen Valley that would offer students of color an opportunity to be a part of the National Society of Black Engineers. And certainly white students can also be a part of it. However, it is a path that has really supported some students of color in realizing goals and dreams that they may have had. So we're excited to learn more about that. And I'm really hoping that we get lots of attendees to come out and learn with me. We also will have a representative from LATO, Life After Trauma organization, that we're working with. That's a third-party organization that has supported our staff to date with the stress associated with the pandemic and coming back to school in ways that look really different. This group is now moving on to tap and support our parents as well as our students. So we'll learn more about what that's going to look like. So I'm excited to have that information be presented Thursday night, and hope that we get lots of attendees to learn along with us and then hopefully participate. Thank you.
Dr. Russell, could you send a Zoom link to the board?
Yes, be happy to do that. Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, and just a quick aside too, Dr. Russell, I don't know if there's anything out there or not, but I'd encourage us too to think about, is there a similar organization regarding engineering for females? Because the data on women, starting down the path towards math and science and then deviating is pretty profound nationally. And if we're doing it for one group in the school, I mean, I don't know if there's anything out there, but I think it's a question worth asking. So just
happy to report back. Yeah, happy to report back on that. Thank you. Appreciate it. And I completely agree with the data on that. Yeah.
So, okay. Seeing no other comments, that brings us to section 3, the consent agenda. Item 3.01. Oh, sorry. It's a challenge to read this sometimes. Are you able to enlarge that at all, Dr. Russell? It's really small.
How's that?
That's better. Much better. Thank you. Yeah. Items that represent standard routine business of the board are included in the consent agenda. Board members may request to have an item removed for discussion. Consent items as of February 1st, 2021 are listed below. Additional agenda items may be added to the consent agenda during the work meeting. The following items will be added to the consent agenda for approval at the February 8th, 2021 business meeting. And they are, listed there, and they're from sections 7 and 8. So does any board member have comment? Want to remove something? Okay, you can shrink it back down, Dr. Russell. Sorry, it's just that one part was in italics and hard to read. Okay. Seeing none, then it brings us to section 4. Dr. Kolar, if you would, please.
Thank you, Dr. Hallis. Section 4.01 is an education update, so I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Smith.
Good evening again. I have a number of topics to share with you this evening, starting with just some updates as we think about next school year already, and then middle school schedule. It's about this time each year that we bring you some updates regarding our thoughts there, updates on elementary specials programming, and then finally I'll wrap it up and hopefully bring it all together with some projections again for 21-22 staffing. So the instructional calendar is an action item for approval this month based upon feedback that we received from the board last month, as well as from our administration and some of our staff members. We are recommending to you what is called Draft 2, which is the start prior to Labor Day weekend. So starting on August 30th, which brings our last day of school on June 15th. It does include our 4 typical half days for professional development. And I would like to point out that we have had some emails and comments from community members requesting that those half days be scheduled on a Friday. It certainly makes for a nice longer weekend if you need to travel or something. However, we do feel strongly that for professional development, that is not an ideal time. And so we have stuck with the half days in the middle of the week on Wednesdays. But that is there for your approval, hopefully next week, unless you have comments or questions. Okay, the next slide is just an update for you on our digital transformation. At our October Education Committee, we gave a more in-depth update, but in summary, we started with our 9th graders in March of 2019, and we're wonderfully excited to expand to 6th through 12th grade in September of the following fall. And our 2021 plans had been to continue with 6th through 12th, and then due to the pandemic, we were able to add 5th grade and then K-4 using our existing devices. We have still not received all of those Chromebooks that we had ordered for this year, but we are hopeful that they will come in soon. Given that we are one-to-one really across K-12, it is our recommendation to continue in that vein with purchasing new Chromebooks every year for kindergarten, 5th, and 9th, and the students then keep them until they hit that next point or that next grade. You will notice on the agenda for approval this month as well is the purchase of those K-5 and 9 actually for the 21-22 school year. It's a ratification, was discussed at our finance committee. We'd like to get our orders out there as soon as possible to hopefully not be in the same position that we are in this year, and hopefully to receive all of the Chromebooks prior to the start of the 21-22 school year. The next slide goes into enrollments. So it's a little bit like being a detective or a sleuth this year. Typically, we can just roll over our current enrollment numbers and make our projections for the following year. But given our changes in enrollment due to the pandemic, we've previously presented on how many students have chosen to withdraw from Perkiomen Valley and possibly go homeschooling, private schools, cyber charter. We really don't feel that our current enrollment reports can easily be rolled over because the projection might be very conservative, and we're hoping that those students will come back to us. So we did use a different methodology this year. First of all, I did roll over our current enrollments. So the February 2021 numbers, I rolled over. They were in 3rd grade this year. They're in 4th grade next year. We historically add 11% to our kindergarten number to get our 1st grade projection. That's based upon the historical increase that we see. So I did do that again. However, because we feel that that number might be lower than what we actually see, we also took our October enrollments for 2 years, 2019 and 2020. And those are our annual enrollment numbers that we share with the state. That's why we chose the October enrollments. So I used October 2020 and I rolled those students over 1 year to make a projection for 21-22. But I also looked back at our 19-20 pre-pandemic enrollment and rolled those classes over 2 years to get a projection of what, if they were in 3rd grade, they'd be in 5th grade then in 21-22. So we did a little bit more work with it, but we wanted to be able to feel that the numbers we were using were more accurate. What I did then was utilize the highest projection from those 3 models to determine staffing and maintained our class sizes within our policy guidelines. Okay. So here is our elementary enrollments. Looks relatively similar to last month. You can see in the top of the chart, it's our February 2021 enrollment, and then the bottom is the projection. The chart would have been very large had I showed you those past 2 years of October enrollments as well. But the bottom chart does take the highest enrollment, whether it was October 2019, 2020, or the February number, and projects that into each grade level. And then I use the class size guidelines to predict the number of staff that we will need. 2 things I want to point out on this slide. You will notice if you look back at our January slide that shows elementary enrollments, you will notice a change in the K+ programming. So this current year, we are not providing a K+ program because we use those staff members to increase the number of staff providing kindergarten instruction to help us get down to an acceptable number, around 12, 10 kids per group due to social distancing. So we weren't providing the K+. We would like to re-implement that program next year. And so you'll see in that bottom of the chart, you will see numbers for K+ staffing in there. And so you'll notice in last month's report, we were projecting a decline in staff based upon enrollment that was higher than the 2.5 you see in the bottom right corner that we're projecting now. The other piece just to point out, because it's kind of an anomaly, is the South kindergarten projections. And I circled that in blue for you. South has had a wide range of kindergarten enrollment over just the last 2 to 3 years. We've had a year where they were as high as 94, and then this current year, they're at 52. So I did meet with each of the elementary principals and go over their buildings specifically. And when I met with Mr. DeAndrea, we landed on 75 being a more accurate projection for his K numbers moving into next year. So that also impacted the number of staff there. So if you look at the red circles, you'll notice we do have some reduction in staffing at the elementary level based upon these projections. It is a net of a 2.5 out of the elementary program at this point. For our middle schools, starting with West, again, you will see our current enrollments on the left for February 2021. And then on the right, you see those projections based upon the 3 models that I explained and taking the highest number. So for example, in 7th grade, I used the 221 to determine how many staff members we needed. And then you can see the class size numbers on the right. West also looks slightly different from what we presented in January. I've had the opportunity to meet with Mr. Creedon and Mrs. Capriotti to discuss their 6th grade. Last month, we were projecting 9 staff members to try to bring that class size lower. And after quite a bit of conversation, we've talked a lot about teaming in the middle level. And I'll just use the analogy. It's kind of like a baseball team. If you change up the players and you suddenly now have the 3rd baseman playing first base or outfield, and you do that every year, getting to a winning team takes you a lot longer. Middle school teachers have an area of specialty, mainly due to their certifications oftentimes, and trying to keep that team intact and having 2 4-person teams is preferable to creating 3 3-person teams and having teachers learn a new content area. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that, but right now it's our recommendation to stay at 8 sections there and to look for possibilities to reallocate some staff, possibly from elsewhere, to provide some additional support in that West building, given that higher class size in 6th grade. And I just point out on this slide as well, if you look at our current 6th grade, you see an average class size of 27.6. That's not accurately reflecting the students that are in and on site, because many of those students are also participating in virtual. So we didn't realize that 27 this year, although we did project it. And similarly, the numbers on the right are also averages. Not every single section ends up being that particular number. Some might be a little higher, some might be lower, based upon kids having an individual schedule. East looks relatively similar. We are not recommending any changes based from January to February with this. you will see a decrease of 2 staff members in that 7th grade because you'll notice that that class is going from about 250 kids down to less than 220. So we do believe that we can make that work with 8 sections and keeping comparable class sizes to West. So there is a net of 2 positions that could possibly be seen out of the Middle School East. Our high school then is the last one. This is definitely easier in one sense. We roll over the whole grade level and you can see it's relatively similar to where we're sitting at right now with enrollment. But this really comes together when Dr. Moss and her team create the actual schedule by particular course and section. But right now we are not feeling that there will be any increase in staffing, at least in the core courses at the high school at this point in time. So I'll wrap back around to staffing at the end and look at our what it is positions that we are looking to request. But moving on to our middle school schedule, just a quick refresher that for the past couple of years, we have been working with a team of teachers, a core committee to really look at that middle school schedule, to try to tweak it to meet the needs of our adolescent learners. And we did have 2 consultants work with us, Elliot Marenbloom and then Dr. Julie Costin worked with us on inclusive practices throughout this process. And we brought some recommendations forth to the board in the past that then we reflected upon that and decided not to implement all of them this past year. Some because of COVID and others because we didn't feel that we were ready, particularly for that intervention and enrichment piece. So the next slide shows you we have met, the principals and I, along with Dr. Russell, to talk about what we would be considering for the 21-22 year. And you can see in the upper left that we are looking at that advisory period. There's been some scrutiny on that in the past couple of years and trying to schedule that at the same time of day for all grade levels. Currently, 7th and 8th grade is first period, 6th grade is last period. We're recommending to put all of them at the end of the day as that opportunity for students to be able to wrap up or get support that they may need from teachers. And instead of requesting a separate intervention enrichment period, as you had seen in past requests, we would like to incorporate that IE period into the existing advisory. So 2 days per cycle, each grade level would have an IE time. And that maintains our 8-period day at 52-minute periods that we currently have. Secondly, we would like to investigate gifted programming on there and think about how could we consider scheduling that differently, whether we schedule it during the IE time in the advisory or we look to offer it during our elective offerings and provide a level of choice to some of our gifted students. So we have some meetings at the administrative level and then including our middle school gifted teachers in those conversations. Right now it's a pull-out program and some students miss a core class to receive their gifted programming. And then lastly is the health piece on the right and our electives. You know that we are working on a 6th grade health and wellness course and a separate course in 7th and 8th as it's currently part of phys ed. We would like to incorporate some student choice, helping them be getting ready for that transition to their high school and all of the choice that they will have there, as well as we feel it's really important to maintain our music groups and the amount of time that they have for performing groups. So we already have met with the music staff to work collaboratively to create a schedule that between advisory and electives provides them the time with their music groups. So more to come, but I wanted you to know the 3 areas and we're not looking at the significant changes that we've discussed with you in the past. And we do continue to work to increase our staffing to support inclusionary practices in the middle level as well. And then third topic is our elementary specials. We did just have an education committee meeting where we provided an update and entertained lots of great conversation. Just to quickly recap, we had some concerns in the 18-19 school year about the mental health and wellness of our students, and it prompted the exploration of possibly creating a health and wellness course, or how do we provide that level of instruction. And in the 19-20 year, we did an entire audit per se of all of our special areas where each group presented information to a committee so that we could really value what was most important for our students now and in the future. And the result of that was during that review, we reduced all specials from 30 to 28 days, which gave us 12 lessons per year per grade of health and wellness. On the next slide, you'll see that as we moved into 2021, we really were looking at lots of different options pre-COVID. We talked about combining different specials. We had discussions about removing Spanish programming. And ultimately, we had landed on somewhat of a compromise of combining the library and the explorations and splitting it across the grades. But then COVID, and that made us adjust our recommendations. We weren't sure about adding the additional staff that it would take for the health and wellness course, or that we would be prepared given the COVID and pandemic teaching. So ultimately for this year, we did decrease Spanish programming to 15 lessons instead of 30, and that increased health and wellness from 12 to 15 in each grade level. It is our goal this year to somehow evaluate the effectiveness of our health and wellness programming. It's difficult given that we're teaching specials completely virtually in grades 1 to 5, and how do we gather that information? But we are considering surveys to get parent feedback and or some way of assessing or benchmarking our students based upon the CEL competencies and the health standards. So again, more to come on that, but we're trying to find a way to quantify the effectiveness of this program this year to share that with you as well. So as we move into next year, I guess I should start by saying this has taken many years. It's been very thorough, but it has cost quite a bit of stress and anxiety upon the staff as well. So some ideas that we have that we presented at the Education Committee: we could continue in what we currently have. There were some concerns expressed that this is not the year to make a change because of COVID, and that we can't truly evaluate our health and wellness programming because of the delivery model this year. So we could continue with what we have. We do have tier 2 interventions in place in our elementary buildings for social, emotional, and behavioral needs. We've had successful morning meetings in our virtual classrooms that we could continue and even grow in our on-site instruction in next school year. We could consider using some external resources. There are some organizations out there that are willing to come and you can get grants for to help you in that area of social emotional learning. And if we implement the new Into Reading resource, which we are piloting for ELA, there is a CEL component embedded into the modules for that as well. So if we were to maintain what we currently have, we do feel like there's a number of other pieces going on that would help to support the social emotional learning of our students. We could also increase health and wellness to 30 lessons per year. That would require some additional staffing, and same thing with returning Spanish programming to 30 lessons per year. However, that additional staffing may be able to be realized within our own staffing based upon reallocation and staffing and enrollment numbers. The next slide has just a few more ideas. We could revisit that combination of library and explorations. Last year, we had landed on K-2 students receiving library and grades 3 to 5 students receiving explorations. However, we could also consider creating a new course and taking the curriculum from both of those and merging them into a new course that would combine them. We've also had an idea of possibly combining the health and wellness, leaving it at the 15 days, but combining it with library to still have that exposure to the library every other cycle for our students to access books, as well as learn some of those other skills that is part of our library curriculum. And there has been conversation about removing library as a special. And I want to make sure that I am real clear. We're not talking about eliminating libraries from our buildings. We would still have libraries. We would still have opportunities for book selection, but we could take it off the special line and really redesign that role of the elementary librarian. Again, that Into Reading module has some inquiry and research skills embedded into it that are similar to some of what we do in the library curriculum. So again, something else to consider. Our hope is to bring back to you potentially in March a recommendation from the administration with feedback from the Education Committee as to what steps to take for the 21-22 school year. So we continue with lots of ideas. So the last thing I'll kind of circle back to the beginning of my presentation on staffing. We have been talking about the role of an instructional coach, and you'll notice 3 types of positions listed there on the screen. We have technology integration specialists. We have inclusion facilitators that really focus on the inclusion of our students with special needs into the core classroom. And then we have positions that are considered instructional coaches. And over the years, we have morphed these positions based upon the needs of the district. So there was a year when we were really increasing our digital transformation and the use of modern resources. So we adjusted and we had 2 technology integration specialists where previously there was 1. But all of these roles really focus on providing good best practices to our teachers. They are supports for teachers. And so there is an idea about where these are very specialized, kind of broadening that and looking for a coach. So the next slide shows you that a coach really, if you can find the right person to fulfill these roles, can perform all of these responsibilities. And maybe they have a specialty in one of these particular areas, but it benefits quality instructional practices for all students. They would have some skills in technology integration. They would have background in special education and how do we include students? How do we differentiate for all students? And then really generally just those best practices. So the next slide talks about how these three could really be incorporated into one role defined as the instructional coach that allows us to meet multiple needs. Again, they're capable of inclusion, tech integration, best practices. This is an idea that Dr. Boyd and I and Dr. Russell have talked about, but it would be very crucial to find the right people to fulfill these roles, particularly having that special education background to ensure that we're supporting inclusionary practices. So you'll notice on this slide, just a staffing comparison for you, our current year, we had 2 identified technology integration specialists, 1 identified inclusion facilitator, and there currently is 1 position that's not filled, defined as an instructional coach, for a total of 4. Now, I will note that 1 of those technology integration specialists has recently shifted to become our supervisor of communication and technology systems. That's Dr. Tarapar. Moving into 21-22, if you can just go back for just a moment, we would have 1 technology integration specialist because Dr. Parr is now in the supervisor role, 1 inclusion facilitator, and we were requesting in our last, in January, to add another inclusion facilitator. And at this point, we are suggesting that that title be changed to instructional coach of 2 positions. Again, so what we're showing you here is that it's 4 currently. It would be 4 next year should we that request materialize. So finally, in summary, this is our staffing, what we anticipate to see based upon enrollment, and then what we are requesting. So at the high school level, we are requesting 1 additional staff person for special education. At the middle level, we see 2 positions, a reduction of 2 based upon our enrollments, but a request for 3, 1 being special education and 2 health and wellness, should we fulfill that health and wellness course in 6th grade, as well as 7th and 8th being separate. The elementary level, you'll notice 1.5 is shown here, and you might be wondering, well, slide 5 said 2.5 positions based upon the enrollments. If you recall, for this year in particular, we hired 1 additional person to help with our virtual numbers so that our virtual class sizes were comparable to our half-day blended model. That position was intended to be temporary only. So 1 of those 2.5 is that 1 position. So the net is 1.5. And then we possibly will need an autistic support position. Dr. Boyd and her team continue to have early intervention meetings, so we will know more as that information comes in if we will realize the need for that autistic support at the elementary level. And then across the district level, you see a +3 there, the instructional coach that I recently spoke about. The BCBA or RBT, those are behavior supports for our students. And then the supervisor position that has previously been presented by Dr. Russell and I around equity, diversity, and notice on the bottom, it says that that can be considered a replacement for the manager of school and community engagement. So it may not actually end up being an add to the budget. More to come on that next month as we present. That was a lot. Hopefully you're not confused, but I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Any questions from board members? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Moving on to item 4.02 is the enrollment report for February. Mrs. Smith, I don't know if you want to mention anything in particular or if there's anything you wanted to point out
There's really, we changed the enrollment report with quite a few different things in January, which I had pointed out. So it looks very similar, and our numbers are pretty similar to our January enrollment. To go back to, there was a question, I believe, from our public during the comment section about the numbers and when they are effective. They are based upon, I will say that the buildings gave us the enrollment numbers as of Friday, projecting for where we are for the month of February. So they do not reflect any potential changes in instructional mode at the high school that might occur starting with the third marking period later this week. Hopefully that answered that.
So just to clarify, even though this is for February and the mode is changing in a couple of days, that's not included in this?
Correct. The numbers for the high school are as of Friday, based upon, the secretaries give them to us like the day before the board meeting so that they can be as accurate as possible. We can certainly, I can ask Dr. Moss for what that change will be, later this week. I can certainly get that and we can include it in the memo.
Yeah. I think that would be helpful since we are talking about instructional modes. It'd be one more piece of evidence for, moving one way or another.
Absolutely.
Any other board questions or comments on the enrollment? Okay, are we ready to move on? Section 4.03, the motion will be to approve the calendar for 2021-2022 as presented. And I believe Mrs. Smith talked about this in her update a little bit. Are there any comments or questions? I am not seeing any, so are we okay moving this item to consent? Okay. Item 4.04, the motion will be to approve the phased school reopening health and safety plan version 15 for the 2020-2021 school year as presented. And I believe this refers back to the kindergarten orientation. Is that correct? Any comments or questions about this?
No, I just want to clarify. I want to make sure, Dr. Russell, I went through it and the only thing I saw was the add-in for kindergarten. That's it, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Did you need us to take action on this tonight or can we move this to consent?
We're okay time-wise if you'd like to move it to consent. Registration doesn't begin until March, so we're okay. Thank you.
Okay, so if everyone's okay, we'll move 4.04 to consent. Moving on to item 4.05. The motion will be to approve the superintendent's recommendation to allow a non-resident senior who has met the requirements of policy 202 to conclude the 2020-2021 school year at Perkiomen Valley High School. Any comments or questions? So let's also move 4.05 to consent, and that concludes my section.
Thank you, Dr. Kolar. That brings us to section 5, business. Mr. Dorr, if you would, please.
Thank you, Dr. Hallis. Section 5.01, it's a finance update. Mr. Weaver, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Dorr. Good evening, everybody. I will try to share my screen unless you guys can see the presentation.
We can see it, but it doesn't.
I can see it, Jim.
Oh, okay. All right, good. Okay, so tonight's presentation, moving along in the agenda, we'll have a bond issue update from Mr. Chris Bamber, and it turns out it'll be Ms. Jamie Doyle in the last minute switcheroo. We'll have a tax assessment appeal stipulation for settlement for the JMJ Holdings, a real quick update on that. We'll touch upon the South Elementary School playground. We're pleased to bring that forward for tonight and a review. The ESCO 4.0 project and its final recommendation form. We'll have a summary of the COVID grants, and then we'll hit upon the STA negotiations. So first and foremost, Jamie Doyle is here to join us to review a bond issue recommendation. And I do have
Dr. Russell, I don't know if you can, but there is a second presentation in Board Docs, which is Jamie Doyle's presentation.
So Mr. Weaver, I do not believe that I can have you share the screen, but Mr. Ganesh may be able to arrange that. I'm not sure.
I'm making Jim a co-host. He should be able to share a screen.
Okay. So should I stop sharing then so that he can do that?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Jim, you should be able to share your screen now, Jim.
Okie dokie. So, Jamie?
Good evening. Yes, I'm here. Hopefully you can hear me loud and clear.
Yes.
It's a pleasure to be with you all this evening. Just a brief update to what we've been talking about for the last several months. If you go to page number 1 of our handout, we're talking about a $6 million financing with a tight wrap structure and taking advantage of these all-time low interest rates that are still achievable. If you go to the next page, you can see our interest rate chart, and I'll focus on the lowest right-hand corner. Again, you can see the all-time lows that were just set in August of 2020, and you can see how we're hovering right around those all-time lows. Again, an excellent opportunity to take advantage of in the market. If you go to the next page, you'll see your existing debt portfolio, so I won't belabor that. Nothing's changed on that page. And one more page, this is the most important page. So this illustrates the $6 million construction fund deposit with a tight wrap. And if you scroll down just a little bit, we're focusing on the blue column number 4. This is a conservative estimate of what the new debt service would look like on that new $6 million for your capital improvement plan. And so one more page is a sample motion at the top that would authorize the finance team to get the paperwork in order for your ultimate approval for the $6 million borrowing. The timeline is such, and this will look familiar to you from prior handouts, I'm sure. Tonight is an update. Next week at your meeting on the 8th, you could pass the motion above if you so choose to authorize the finance team to proceed and again, get the paperwork in order. We would begin the preliminary official statement and initiate the rating process very shortly. And then you'd receive your credit rating around the beginning of March and adopt the parameters resolution as early as your March 8th voting meeting. And that parameters resolution is the official legal document that allows us to go out into the market on the best day and not just necessarily a board voting meeting day, and gives you a lot of flexibility in the market as things are certainly challenging and volatile on certain days, depending on what economic news comes out. And then as soon as the next day after the parameters resolution, or later if that's not the best day, we can actually lock the interest rates in with a competitive internet auction as you've historically used. And that would allow for settlement to occur roughly 35 days later, mid-April, we'll call that, is when the proceeds would show up in your construction fund and be available to pay for your projects. So I will pause there. Short and sweet, but it's very much in line with what we've been talking about over the last couple of months.
Are there any questions for Jamie? Again, this is predicated upon a $6 million bond issue that is part of the ESCO 4.0 that we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. Okay. Thank you, Jamie. I am sure if there are any questions, we'll track you down. Thank you so very
good.
much.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay, so next, can everybody still see the presentation itself now? Okay, so moving forward, We did hear a little bit about there is a board motion a little bit farther down in regards to the tax stipulation and settlement associated with JMJ Holdings. Again, this is predicated upon the county system of the course management system that pushed this assessment to the brink of negotiations. We did negotiate. We talked about this in November and December at a board level and a finance committee level. And the offer and the stipulation was negotiated by myself and Mr. Chesney. And we have that a little bit farther on in the board agenda. Any questions on that? Moving forward to the South Playground. So Mr. DeAndrea, Mr. Clemmer, and I have been working for many months now. Dr. Russell has joined us at different occasions in regards to the how we could make the South playgrounds better for the kindergarten and the large playground area. It's been a long process, and we are happy to recommend that we approve Lions Recreation at a total cost of $136,462.67 per CoStar's contract. The makeup of this is 43,000, almost 43.1 for the kindergarten playground. That does include all labor to install and the equipment, and about $93,365 for the large playground on the left-hand side if you're looking at South. Again, all labor and installation included for a total cost of $136,462. We have been provided a donation by South Home and School to help offset those costs of $15,000. So the total cost to the district, $121,462.67. And that is that will be made up by the remaining monies in the bond issue from the ESCO 3.0 and some capital project monies to help offset that and to make that work. Any questions on that? We do have a design in here, and we do have the proposal and the cost associated with that. I'm sorry that the numbers are so tiny, but the important part is that working with Mr. DeAndrea, we did have several different versions of the kindergarten playground and the large playground and settled in on these two basic designs. And I can tell you that Mr. DeAndrea is thrilled to actually get this moving along. Moving forward to the proposed ESCO 4.0, we have been working on an ESCO 4.0 for the past several months. We have seen some larger numbers. We've seen some smaller numbers, and we're happy to recommend that the ESCO 4.0 project settles in at $5,331,500. We do have Mr. Mowry with us tonight to help us work our way through the ESCO 4.0. Phil, are you there?
Now, can you hear me?
Yes. Thanks, Phil. Okay, so for the full board's edification here, to go over these projects, we can go line item by line item, or we can go by groups. The major difference between what we focused in on for a potential total ESCO 4.0 project and the one that we're presenting tonight is we have actually removed the bipolar ionization project. That was about $1 million that we removed from the last version that we saw of this. And the main reason that we did that is in conversation with the various committee members and the research that we've done. The science is still out on whether the bipolar ionization would do what we need it to do. We do have bipolar ionization installed at South and for several units at the high school. The high school units are put in there because they don't have window access. So some sort of a bipolar ionization was deemed necessary there. And of course, South, as we went through the South Elementary project from several years ago, which was the basic beginning of the ESCO 3.0, the situation that we had there was untenable. So we moved forward with a bipolar ionization project there for the univents. So would the board like me to go through each and every line item, or how would you like to approach this? I do have a summary sheet if the board does not mind. That just basically goes through some of the backup. One of the other larger components to this, in addition to the chillers and boilers and all of the other projects that we talked about, glycol installation, is the rationale on return on investment for our natural gas pipeline up at Middle School West. The last time we talked about this, the committee members were very astute at driving, proving why the return on investment would be wise for us to spend the money to put a gas pipeline essentially a little bit farther down Big Road from the Wawa into Middle School West, and why would it pay for itself? Working with Mr. Mowry, we actually went through and did some conversions between oil and natural gas and what those conversion units would show. I am providing today that the return on investment for this particular item, just the $600,000, which is the estimated cost from PICO, would be about within 8 years, it would pay itself back. So that's a heck of a return on investment. And that is one of the reasons and verifications that we have been using to include that particular project into our ESCO. The other portion of that total cost, which is over $1 million, is of course the conversion of the chiller or the boiler from all oil to natural gas. So that would happen no matter what. We'd either have to retrofit the boiler because of its age to accept oil, or to convert it at some point in time. So in my mind, that was a neutral offset. We would have that cost one way or another. Mr. Mowry, anything you'd like to add?
No, you're handling it very well.
All right, school board members, any questions on this? Okay, thank you. Again, there are some additional reasoning in there. If you're asked any questions from any constituents or any other people from the public, you do have additional information there.
And I would just add that pursuant to the Guaranteed Energy Savings Act, the district will be proceeding with an advertised request for proposal that would be modified by PHM Associates pursuant to their proposed contract, and that the award of contract would be following a review of any and all proposals and recommendation to the board at its March 8th meeting, and that there will be an additional advertisement relating to that proposed award of contract. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Subers. Ms. White, I see your hand is up.
Thanks, Jim. Mr. Weaver. So I wanted to just say thank you for doing that extra layer of justification with regards to the ROI on the pipeline. I guess it's trenching, even though it's in a street. So that was hugely helpful. One of the things that I had thought about after our safety and ops meeting was, and I was going to email, I should have probably done that, is whether or not we have looked in any avenues of solar energy. I know that with the amount of surface area on buildings and then also just in land over there, especially at West, I was just curious as to whether or not that was something that we had looked into or discussed, or if that was really viable for a public school application. And I was wondering if Mr. Mowry could maybe speak to that a little bit.
Sure, that's a great question. It does have a long history of conversation. The solar credits that were around several years ago, there was some question as far as how much those solar credits would carry us. They've exchanged on the open market, and they essentially dried up over the past 5 to 10 years. And so it really was not plausible for us to go solar the past 10 years. Mr. Mowry, I don't know if you would like to add to that. Hopefully with this new regime coming on board, a new president, a new way of thinking things, perhaps maybe that solar market might reignite some additional thinking. Mr. Mowry?
Yes, I've done several solar projects, not recently, for the reasons you indicated. You know, back when solar was very popular and you know, economically viable, the SRECs that you were discussing, the credits that it's an artificial measure of the amount of solar energy generated, but it was priced at a certain amount per SREC. And those numbers were running $50, $60, $70, $85. And then when when the market went beyond Pennsylvania, the legislation opened up people to bid on it and provide it on a much larger geographical base. And the projects flooded the market. And so the value of the SREX went down to less than $10, $3, $4, $5. I believe they're back to about 20 to 25, although I haven't been, firsthand versant in these projects recently. I did a big one in a fairly good sized one in Owen J. Roberts several years ago, but that was after we tried every which way to make it pay for itself. And the only way we did the solar project was to underwrite it by other measures, control measures, building insulation, et cetera. I know that they're back out with another ESCO project right now, and they're requesting proposals on small solar demonstration projects, I guess is the best way I could describe it. And I'll follow that because I know the ESCOs. I'll know who gets the project, and I'll look at the numbers to see if it makes any sense. I'm always kind of watching that, but in recent years, it just has not been viable. The projects that I've done have been more demonstration projects than anything else. So we'll keep an eye on it.
Yeah, it's interesting because, in talking about the outdoor classroom, which was, I think that might have been a different meeting. Was that a different? I don't remember if it was a different meeting or not. But when we were talking about the outdoor classrooms and tie into STEM and all of these things, I was actually thinking about the solar panels. I guess there's more than one variety of application installation, right? Like there's probably I think that there's shelter solar panels, right? For outdoor venues I've seen. And then there's also kind of like a large scale, like solar harvesting installation, right? I mean, I don't know a ton about it. It just, to me, I felt like it may be a natural tie-in to allow for kind of double duty, if for lack of a better explanation. And I just was curious as to whether or not that was something that was worthwhile to even really discuss.
I think it's certainly a conversation that we should have moving forward. Yes. Now the return on investment, that's always something that we zero in on as well. So that's definitely part of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Lofton, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. I do want to piggyback onto the conversation about SREX because we'd installed in solar for my house, 10, 15 years ago. And that was at the time where we thought we might get some money back from the SREX. We got a negligible amount from SREX, but it still cut our electricity bill in half and paid for itself in 7 years. And so I'm not sure why the conversation around solar is hinging on the SREX, because the savings generated through, I would think that we would be, the amount of energy savings that we would experience because we're generating our own electricity would eclipse anything that we think we might be getting from SREX. I mean, I know that's been my experience personally, so I think it might be worth investigating that again, regardless of whether or not the SREX program is reinvigorated. I don't know that it would be, but yeah, I don't think the conversation should be hinging on that.
I think that was part of it. I think, and Phil, maybe you can add a little bit to this. I think it's just about the gross size of a building, of an element of any kind of a school building versus a residential home. And the ability you need so many more solar panels to be able to offset the massive amount of energy that these buildings need. Phil, maybe you can say it a little better.
Yeah, when I mentioned that the projects that I've been involved in have basically been demonstration projects, we'll have a small solar array on one section of a high school. We did a couple of these up in Central Bucks a few years ago. And it goes down to a kiosk in the lobby so that you can monitor what's going on, and it becomes an instructional tool. It does save energy, but in order to get a significant percentage of the savings for a typical school district building, say a high school, even an elementary school, it takes a fairly large array, and it gets very expensive. And that's where the return on investment comes into play. You have to either put them on the roof or you have to put them on the ground. If you put them on the ground, they're subject to use and abuse issues. Possibly, I know when we did O&J Roberts, they had plenty of space with perfect alignment to put it on the ground, but it just, obviously the potential for damage was too great. So they put it up on the roof, and we did, I would say it was probably about a quarter at best of the size it would have taken to make a big dent in the total energy consumption there. But it contributes. There's no question about that. It's a question of return on investment. And in the past, without substantial SREC contribution to the project cost, nobody was willing to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I know when we did this again 15 years ago, it paid for itself in 7 years. So, and the more you get, I'm going to assume the more energy production you're going to be offsetting. I wouldn't imagine we would ever be able to eliminate our other sources of energy at our buildings. But, I'd be interested to see the numbers run. Especially now, 15 years later, I would hope we have advances in technology.
I was just going to say, I think that I've read recently where the actual solar panels have changed as well. So they're better at keeping a charge and lasting a little bit longer, and they're better protected. However they've designed it and engineered it. So we can look into that.
Yeah, and the way we run it is, the way it's set up is it's, linked into our connection with Pico. And so when we are generating more electricity than we're using, we're actually selling it back to Pico. So it's both an inflow and an outflow. And so, it's a reduction in the amount that we're using. And there's also every month on my electric bill, there's a credit for what we're selling back to Pico.
Now that's how they're set up. In most instances, a school district would not be contributing back to Pico, except in, possibly some period where very little was going on. And just as a side point, the economics have gotten better for solar in say the last 5 to 10 years, because the price of the solar panels has gone down with competition, predominantly from China, which is not unusual in this day and age. So that, the economics are better than they were, say, 6, 7, 8 years ago. But still, again, if people look at it, when I deal with businesses, they want a 2 or 3 year payback, and you're just not going to see that. School districts will tolerate a 10-year payback, but we weren't able to do that before. As I mentioned, I'll be interesting to see what O&J Roberts gets in the way of numbers, because they'll come in another month. So,
can you remind me what the required time frame is for the payback under GIZA? Is it?
It can be up to 20 years.
It can be up to 20 years through the GIZA. Okay, thank you.
If Mr. Mowry, if I could kindly kind of piggyback on Mrs. Lofton's question. Are there similar kind of standards for wind? Because I've in my professional life, I've been involved with projects and they've typically been overseas, in other countries, but where we've done combinations even of wind and solar. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the big massive turbines that everybody thinks of. I know, for example, Montgomery County Community College in Pottstown has those lights along pathways. They kind of look like egg beaters rather than the turbine this way. They're on the top and they spin. But I'm just curious, again, as just as Mrs. Lofton raised the question about, is this a way to reduce costs? What's the correspondence with wind technology too?
I'm not really familiar with it at the current time. I mean, in terms of using it in an ESCO project, again, you're looking at the way the ESCO project works is the sum total of all the measures you do, whether it's solar, wind turbine, building controls, insulation, etc. When you get through the analysis where you have a cost, an upfront cost, and then you have annual savings, the way the ESCO runs is up to 20 years for those annual savings costs to repay the initial investment. And it can be any mix of solar, wind, whatever the owner wants to put on the facility. I have very, very little experience with wind. I was involved in a review of some project up in the Scranton area and if you go up there, you'll notice that there are some wind turbines up there running, but that was more, of an informational review going on to see what was going on. That was several years ago, and I haven't really done anything with wind since, but it's another source. I believe the ones you're talking about at the Montgomery County College up in Pottstown are very similar on a smaller scale to what is at the Eagles Stadium.
Yeah, these are they're street lights, for lack of a better term, but they're not tall, overarching things like you'd think on a street. They're pathway lights, but they're not waist high. They're, I guess probably 10, 12 feet tall with the turbine on top. I just thought of it because literally when I would work in Nicaragua, every town you go into, there's a store that's literally selling solar panels, wind turbines, water turbines, everything, because people are desperate for power. And it's, you put one of these in the right spot and you're making money instead of losing money. So I just thought I'd ask, that's all.
Yeah, I think you're going to see more of that in terms of the United States. I've done an awful lot of cruising over the years, through my wife, who was a lecturer on cruise ships, and you go into any port in Europe or around the world, and 75% of them have wind turbines all over the place, coming in or on the side of the hills. We're beginning to see more of it in the United States, and I believe with the current administration coming in, they're going to put obviously a lot more emphasis on regenerative power and not carbon-based power. So we'll probably see more of that.
Okay. Good conversations. We've got some additional work to do, but the base ESCO 4.0 is presented as part of that bond issue that we had just talked about with Jamie Doyle. So moving forward, here is our monthly update on COVID grants. I will try to make this a little bit bigger here. Here we go. So the most significant portion of this is the ESSERS grant part 2, that you can see that is 871,000, almost 872,000. That number has come down a little bit from the first go round, late December, early January, where it was somewhere around 923,000 for Perkiomen Valley. At the end of the day, it comes out of the wash at 871,890. That is the ad, and those are the things that we're utilizing these grant opportunities for. The others have not changed, and we continue to plug away on many of these on different levels. Okay, moving on to the last portion of tonight's presentation, STA negotiations update. The district did receive counterproposal number 3. We did review some options with Mr. Subers. They are sticking to their pandemic clause and their percentages. So that's at the 45% and the 178 days. They did come down a little bit from 178 to 175. But I have been working with Mr. Subers on what's a viable counter offer. And it looks like we're coming into a critical timing for this. Hence, that's why we have it here tonight. So some things to consider as we look at this. Considering that they're stuck on the pandemic clause at 45% of all the normal bus runs, looking at what the actual dollars would be, because we're unsure if we're ever going to use this pandemic clause. Again, a reminder that the pandemic clause is essentially a guarantee of the number of days for transportation for our students to go to school. So if we were to happen to have something and we have the pandemic clause in there, no matter how many days we miss because we're out, because of we're quarantining or whatever the situation is, we would have to pay STA that percentage of normal bus runs. Essentially what that means is, if you look at the last portion of that little graph there, that means that for every day we would not meet that guarantee, we would pay to STA $18,000 under their proposal, and we would continue to save $22,000 because the daily average cost per day is $40,000, $40,052.34. We have countered at 15%. So if you look at what our counter is, we would pay them $6,000 and we would essentially save $34,000. If we look at somewhere in between, and I'm not recommending anything other than the fact that we just need to start thinking about this if we're interested. If we go 35% as a payout and then work with the number of days behind the scenes, we would pay out $14,000 again for every day that we would not meet that guarantee. So if we only go to school for 165 days and we have 170 would be our offer or 175 would be theirs, every one of those days we would have to calculate that and then cut them a check. Our purpose for keeping to the guarantee at the 170 frame would be based upon the fact that we already utilized 2 Act 80 days, which are essentially the 2 election days. And we do know that the state is working on FID days, flexible instructional days, as part of what school districts may have in their arsenal moving forward. Based upon that, we could go forward with 170 days as a counter offer to them, along with either 35%, 45%, or stick to our 15%. I think we are at a critical stage for negotiations with STA right now. Any thoughts or comments from the school board perspective? Mrs. Evans Brockett.
I think with the recent COVID outbreak, I have some real concerns about how they were or were not following our safety protocols, which have given me a lot of questions of moving forward. So I'd like more information on that before we continue to negotiate, because we got some real concerning possible information of not following what they said they were going to do.
Thank you. I would not disagree with that. We have had a long history with them, but this is some, serious concerns. Mrs. Roberts.
Yes, have we gone out to bid at all on anybody else?
We have not. I've been working with Mr. Subers. We do have an RFP that we have prepared, depending upon the conversation tonight.
Yeah, I think that between the recent circumstances as well as the inflexibility of the negotiation, I personally think it may be time to look into something else.
Thank you, Mrs. Roberts.
And Mr. Weaver, have they justified, or they've given any justification for their 45%? Because I know, we had a discussion with them last year in relation to the pandemic, and they were asking for something much higher, if I remember. And when we actually demanded a cost analysis, it came in much lower than the 45%. They had obviously laid off all their workers by that point, but I'm just curious of what's making up that number.
So they have stated that the 45% is essentially what they would need at a minimum to cover all of their fixed costs, all of their costs associated with the leases for buses and all of that kind of stuff. And they've stuck to that number. We have had conversations about that, and I was pretty blunt in saying that, from a board perspective and from an administration perspective, the 45% was going to be tough to swallow.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Kolar.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the pandemic cause aside, because I'm fairly optimistic that we're on the, upswing of things, and that's not even going to come into play. But beyond that, I have the same issues as some of the other board members have brought up. I think it's, with everything going on, we need to have some meetings with them and find out what's been going on, because most of what I've heard is hearsay from the community, but I'm hearing some pretty concerning things about their practices and how they've managed this pandemic. So I would want to know more about that.
Thank you, Dr. Kolar. Mr. Dorr.
Mr. Weaver, is administration making a recommendation here, whether we stick to the 15 or the 35?
Well, so the recommendation would be to move forward at the 35% and 170 days. Remember, this was done prior to a lot of the conversation that we're having now about the safety protocols. So right now, from a business perspective, absent that information that we absolutely have to review and vet, was going to be my recommendation. Yes, to go back to them with another counter proposal, but things have changed.
Do we have a few days to wait to hear back from Dr. Russell on her meeting? To be able
Yes.
to take it?
Yes, we do. I will let the board know that in conversation with Mr. Subers, we are running close to a timeline where if we do issue an RFP, we may limit ourselves with the number of applicants that can reply, because of the fact that they will need to have equity lines to be able to buy out the buses and to, do all the kind of stuff that they need to do when a transition like that would take place.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dorr. Mrs. Lofton.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. So given the timeline, given some of the questions that we have, I think that we should go to RFP just so that we're keeping our options open, particularly because, as they're saying, we want to make sure that if we are going to RFP, that it is something that's viable for other potential bidders. So I would certainly like to see the conversation continue, but I'd also like to see what else is out there. And, maybe we'll find out that other companies are also looking for comparable pandemic clause statements. But at this point, I don't see that we're hurting anything by seeing what our other options are.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Lofton. And again, we have received their counter proposal, so it's up to us at this point in time anyway. So we kind of control that timeline. Okay, great. Thank you, school board, for the direction. And we'll keep everybody apprised of how the meetings go this week.
So actually, Jim, if I can just piggyback, do we need to vote to put it out to RFP, or can you just proceed with doing that? Because I recall, I think around the ESCO at some point that was like there was a vote to put things out to RFP. So
I can answer that. Technically, you're not required, but I think in the situation, I would suggest that we add an agenda item for next week regarding issuing a transportation RFP. Okay. And Jim had forwarded me a draft last week. In the meantime, I'll review and finalize the proposed RFP, and I would suggest that in light of the scope of the proposal or the service, that we have that board approved for next week and get it out on the street and see what kind of interest there is.
Can I just also ask about the timeline for return of that? What is the standard? Is there a date that you really needed to?
There's nothing required. We want to give them a reasonable period of time to do their investigation and come up with the proposals. There's no required minimum on that. I would propose, at least 3 weeks.
I was thinking 3 weeks, but I wasn't sure if there was a decision date that we needed to abide by. That way we could kind of marry it with that.
Well, so I would just add to that. That's a really good question. If we need to have everything in order by April, And I only say that from a budgetary perspective because we need to know where we're at. Who knows? An RFP could come out and save us some money from a budgetary perspective for 21-22. But I'm sure Mr. Subers will say that legitimately you can go until June until you find right before you finalize your budget.
Right, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't recommend that
Right.
based on the practicalities and the budgeting issues. We need, yeah, I would say that we would give them 3 weeks from next Monday.
So
and
then a review and presentation for maybe the second meeting in March.
Correct.
Yep.
Okay, just so everybody has an idea about what we're really looking at in terms of receiving the information back, but then also having time to present it and make a decision.
Thank you for that clarification, Ms. White. Okay, and I believe that's all that I have for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Okay, 5.02, no report for February for grants. 5.03, be a motion to ratify the purchase of 1,200 Lenovo Model 500E Chromebooks for the one-to-one initiative, an approximate cost of $394,800 through CoStars. Any questions? Okay, can we please move that to consent? 5.04, be a motion to approve stipulations to settle tax assessment appeals for 2 properties located at 4410 Skippack Pike, parcel number 51-000-03451-00-8 and 4420 Skippack Pike, parcel number 51-00-03448-002, known as JMJ Holdings, as provided by the solicitor and business administrator. Any questions? Okay, please move that to consent. 5.05, we have a motion to approve Lions Recreation to purchase and install the kindergarten and large playground structures at South Elementary School under CoStars contract 014-183 at a cost not to exceed $136,463. Any questions? Okay, if we can move that to consent. We have a motion to approve NLX North America Inc. Demand Response Agreement as presented, effective July 1, 2021 through May 31, 2026. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, if you can move to consent, please. 5.07, the motion to approve a consultative service agreement with PHM Associates as attached and recommended by solicitor Fox Rothschild, excuse me, in the amount of $7,500 initial payment plus 2.5% of the resulting construction contract contingent on the successful negotiations of an ESCO 4 contract. Any questions? Okay, we can move to consent, please. 5.08, motion to authorize the administration to work with PFM Financial Advisors LLC as financial advisor and Fox Rothschild LLP as bond counsel and solicitor in conjunction with the issuance of the district's general obligation bond series for 2021, used to provide a construction fund deposit for various capital projects in the amount not to exceed $6 million and to be issued by a competitive internet auction structured as a tight wrap. Any questions? Seeing none, we can move that to consent, please. 5.09, motion to approval of Montgomery County Intermediate Unit budget for 2021-2022, representing a 1.09% increase or decrease for PV's share. Any questions? Okay, we can move that to consent, please. 5.10, motion to approve the use of $373,000 committed PSERS and $594,316 from debt service as part of the preliminary budget process for 2021 and 2022. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, can we move to consent? 5.11 will be presented February 8th, and that ends my section.
Thank you, Mr. Doer. That brings us to section 6, payment of bills. Dr. Weston, if you would, please.
Thank you. Item 6.01, the ratification of bills and payroll and authorization of payments. And item 6.02, the approval of the treasurer's report and financial statements. Both of these will be presented for action on February 8th. And that concludes section 6.
Thank you, Dr. Weston. That brings us to section 7, professional personnel. Ms. White, if you would, please.
Thank you. Items 7.01, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 are all on consent.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to section 8, support personnel. Mrs. Roberts, please.
Thank you, Dr. Hallis. 8.01, acceptance of retirements and resignations. 8.01, 8.02, 8.03, and 8.04 are also all on consent. And so that concludes section 8.
Thank you very much. That brings us to section 9, governance. Mrs. Mayers, please.
Thank you. The following policies are presented for our first reading. Policies are meeting agendas, discriminatory Title IX sexual harassment affecting students, discipline of students convicted, adjudicated of sexual assault, dating violence, gun violence, public complaints, community engagement, and school volunteers. Any questions? If we can move these to consent. A motion to approve the 2021 board goals as presented. Dr. Russell, did you want to say anything or?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Mayers. I just wanted to quickly share with the board some of the recommendations on the part of Cabinet Administration for board goals in the upcoming year. And these would all fall under preparing our students to be future ready, cultivating safe and supportive schools, and nurturing those community partnerships that we strive for. Many of the goals are the same ones that you reviewed and strove to meet last year. We have a couple of adjustments that we wanted to call out. We're focusing our professional development of our staff on culturally responsive teaching. That's actually how we characterize best practice today as we think about an awareness of diversity and how we might best engage our students, also having some sense of the brain science and how learning occurs. So we have altered the language in this goal here. We have also wanted to call out that we continue to look to the resources, the opportunities, the experiences that foster knowledge, skills, and experiences among our students to prepare them to be future ready. And that really pertains to, in this education section, some of what we're doing in curriculum, instruction, and programming overall. As we continue through, again, in many of the sections, there are no recommendations on the part of administration for consideration of the board. However, under personnel, I have suggested that we continue to consider how we increase diversity among our staff, all employee groups, so that the percentages mirror our student population. So that's something we want to continue to work towards. And then in the governance section, we want to continue to figure out how we engage our public with effective communication. We talked about that a little bit this evening with some examples around what we might do with our schools, and certainly build back some of the relationships that have felt strained this year based on all that's occurred in the pandemic. But essentially, we want to engage in effective communication with our community members to strengthen relationships and advance the mission and vision of the district, doing that in partnership. And lastly, we want to continue to focus on how we collaborate together, the school board and the superintendent, to organize and carry out board meetings in a manner that's informative and efficient. Any questions on those ideas that are being proposed to you by administration?
Mrs. Evans-Brockett, you have a question?
Just to follow up with number 5, we have had made changes to our committee structure and made those kind of more efficient, combined things. But I'd like for us to have even more conversation about that, because I essentially feel like as board members, we participate in committee meetings and then we're getting a repeat of the same slides and the same discussion at board meetings. And I'm wondering if there's a more effective way for us all to get that information that's more respectful of everyone's time. And some meetings I've been in lately with members from other districts, they're able to get their board meeting done in 20 to 30 minutes, which is obviously very far off from where we are. I know some districts have committees of the whole, and that's where they have this primary discussion. But I'd just like to see if there's a better way, a more efficient way that we can run these meetings so that it's not such an overlap of information from the hours we spend at committee meetings to then the multiple hours we spend at board meetings.
I'd just like to kind of echo something with that too, and it just because it struck me tonight that I imagine sometimes if you're the public looking in, and there are times when questions are asked, do board members have any comments, and there's dead silence, and it can be interpreted that board members aren't involved, and really tonight on a couple occasions I've seen all that. I've been through all that stuff at a committee level, and I've raised my questions there and they've been answered, and I'm letting it go over home plate, because I don't have any questions. So I think there's an optics thing there too that we have to be aware of, just because the public doesn't necessarily realize that we've gone through and in some cases really gone through stuff with a fine-tooth comb, because they're seeing this part of it and not the other part. So it's just I think something as a board that we want to think about, and some of it we may not be able to address, some of it we may be able to.
So I wonder, Dr. Hallis, if it's the will of the board for administration to consider a more efficient approach. Mrs. Evans-Brockett did mention committees of the whole. There are some boards that meet twice a month. One of those meetings is really dedicated to what we would probably characterize as committee work, while the other meeting is the action items or the business meeting. We could certainly talk about that. Both Mr. Weaver and Mrs. Smith do a lot of repeating of what's presented and discussed in their committee settings. And in those committee settings, we certainly have opportunity for public engagement, and that happens more so in the education committee than it does in the finance. But if the board would like administration to consider some possibilities and come back to you with ideas that might make for more efficient presentation of information, but not ignore what the public would benefit from hearing, or giving them the opportunity to realize what's being discussed in these settings, or at least have access to more comprehensive sets of information if we would go to using the education update and the finance update almost as a committee meeting. So we can brainstorm, we can talk about it, we can come back to you with some ideas, and maybe those of you on the board will also consider ideas. Maybe we end up leaving it just the way it is, but maybe we are able to propose something that would be more informative, or I'm sorry, more efficient, but still as informative to all around these topics.
Yeah, I think it's worth thinking about and just raising the question. I know it's not the same thing, it operates a little differently, but For example, when I go to the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit, where I'm also on the board, there's a 25-page agenda and we're done in 45 minutes, you know, because there's a lot of that stuff that's happened behind the scenes ahead of time. And, you know, I know the public likes to sort of see what's happening, but now right now we're in hour 3 and you wonder, you know, I've looked at the attendee numbers and they've dropped by half, you know, and that may be because there's interest in certain topics and not another, but I think it's worth just knocking around to see what we come up with. So I don't want to belabor the point.
Okay, I'll speak to admin about it. We'll follow up. Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Russell. And so should we not make a motion and just have more discussion about this and look at it next week?
I'm comfortable with the way it's, I think, you know, number 5 really covered that we look at more efficient ways. I just want to make sure that that's something we're doing. So I'm fine with moving this to consent.
I don't have an issue with the language either. It's just that, you know, I want to see us, you know, follow through and actually try to figure some of this out. Are there any board members that have an issue with moving it to consent? Okay, I'm seeing positive head shakes and thumbs up. Okay, then let's move it to consent.
Okay, thank you. That ends my section.
Okay, that brings us to section 10, closing items. Item 10.01, we will now accept comments from the audience. Again, if you comment, please state your full name and the municipality you come from. If you're a district employee, then your building. And again, you will have 3 minutes. Mr. Ganesh, if you could kindly unmute Mrs. Bruzak, please.
Hi, this is Lauren Bruzak from Collegeville Borough.
We can hear you.
First, okay, great, thanks. I'd like to share my condolences with the bus driver in our district and her family. Tonight was the first that I learned of this news. It sounds like that you have a lot of information on some safety protocols that broke down. I hope at some point that perhaps you can share them with us so that we don't have any bus issues going forward. Mainly, I just would like to say that it's not easy to speak up at these meetings. It's not easy to share your thoughts and ideas or struggles. It's not easy for me, and I've been doing it for years. And the continued false narrative that if you believe as a community member and as a parent that we can have more students back in school, that you don't care about people and you don't care about teachers is really hard to continue to listen to. And it's stifling the conversation. People don't want to speak up. And that's not a real conversation about a really important topic. My sister is a teacher. My friends are teachers. I love my kids' teachers and I miss them. I think that they are amazing. And I think that they know that because not only do I tell them that, but because of the way my kids treat them with respect, and my kids treat their teachers with respect and love. And that starts here in my home with the way we talk about their teachers. So insinuating that me citing an American Academy of Pediatrics update that was recently released in January on distancing in classrooms is the equivalent of wanting to stuff kids in classrooms in an unsafe way is just not okay. Choosing virtual doesn't put you on a moral high ground to look down on families and kids that are struggling right now, struggling in the current mode of instruction. So if we could please Stop vilifying people for speaking up and shedding light on some of the difficulties that they are having. That would be appreciated. I believe that we can do this, and I believe we can have better conversation than we're having. Thank you.
Thank you. And just a quick comment there, just because I think it's important. I just want to clear, I don't think anybody on the board is vilifying anybody. You know, I think an issue for the board is that there's been some folks who've and maybe you haven't seen it in previous meetings, who've been not exactly the most civil, to put it politely. So there's a lot of tension in the community, and we as a board really do try to struggle with it. And I just want that, you know, folks to be aware. So. Okay, and any other public comments at this time? Just waiting to make sure I give everybody an opportunity in case someone does. Okay. Seeing none, that brings us to item 10.02, comments from board members. And sorry, I got to switch panels. I'm not sure who was first. Ms. Roberts and then Ms. Mayers, please.
Thank you, Dr. Hallis. I think that it's important, considering what we've learned over the last year and a half in regards to people being able to see one another. I think that it's important that we say Lynn Himes' name. Her name was Lynn Himes. She drove your children to school. She did a great job. She worked for STA for quite a long time. And this afternoon, she lost her life to COVID-19. Now, I didn't know Lynn Himes, but I know that she was one of our drivers. Our drivers are given the responsibility of watching over our children in regards to their safety on the school bus and getting them from point A to point B in the most efficient and safe manner that they can. I know that she lives in my neighborhood. I know that she was also a graduate of Perkiomen Valley High School. So it's important, I think, that while we're in the midst of talking to one another and perhaps, as Ms. Bruzek pointed out, berating one another in regards to caring about one another, it's important to understand, I think, that from the custodians to the paraprofessionals, to the bus drivers, to the teachers, to the lunch ladies, to the administration, to everybody who comes in contact with children, they are all people. They all have families. They all have jobs. They all have struggles, and they do their job to the best of their ability, usually quite well. But if we start thinking about them as people, then we're less likely to say, well, you know, I've seen some terrible, terrible language online about the teachers' unions and about the teachers being lazy and not wanting to go back to school. Believe me, the teachers miss your children, but they also have responsibilities to themselves and to their families to keep themselves as safe as possible. And if they get sick, there's no teacher. So I think that if we start thinking about these people like Lynn Himes as people who are risking their health and their own safety for the sake of our children, it might be a little bit easier to understand why there's a certain level of resentment when we hear things that are not so nice about the people who are putting their health and safety on the line. Lynn Himes lost her life this afternoon. She was a neighbor, she was a friend, she was a sibling, she was a graduate of Perkiomen Valley, and she was a worker and served your children. She was a person. And so when you decide to get behind a keyboard and say nasty things about fear and being, being selfish and wanting the kids back in school, and these people they just don't care because the kids are suffering, and they don't care that they care that the kids are suffering. But they're people just like you. And I just wanted to make sure that before this meeting closed, we said her name at least one time. Lynn Himes. She was a person, and she was one of ours, and she gave her life this afternoon to COVID-19 because she exposed herself to a job where she was exposed to COVID-19. And I just wanted to say my condolences to her family, my condolences to her friends, my condolences to everyone who knew her. And I honor her service to this district. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Mrs. Maris?
Thank you, Mrs. Roberts. I want to honor what you said, and I'm going to change the discussion, but that does not in any way negate, right, the horrible tragedy of her losing her life to COVID. I really just wanted to say thank you. I'm really appreciative for administration looking at serving the bigger needs of our student population this year, and by being creative and really talking about how to offer more instruction to most of the students in our school district this summer. I'm just really proud and impressed at the seriousness of COVID and how we've had to do school differently, and that they are implementing a plan this summer to try to remediate and help students connect, find their love of learning again, if maybe they've lost it a little bit, or if they haven't, just to continue to scaffold and build and move forward. So thank you.
And Dr. Kolar, please.
Thank you. I was going to acknowledge the passing of the bus driver, but Mrs. Roberts already did that, so I don't want to dwell on that. But what I did want to point out is, there's been a lot of criticism of board members. We've gotten a lot of emails saying, like she was saying, that we don't care, that we're ignoring mental health of our community. And I just want to point out that, none of us are ignoring the mental health of the community. If you listen to the wellness meetings, we're all struggling with how to serve our students in the midst of this pandemic. And I think that when you think about mental health, it's not just about getting kids in school. It's about all the other supports we're putting in place. And also, I really, really worry about the mental health of our community when we have a loss like this. Parents now have to explain to their children that a bus driver passed away. There are children and families, I'm sure, who are anxious to send their kids on the bus in light of what's been happening. And those are all important mental health issues too. So I just ask that as a community, we really try to look at the bigger picture. There's more than one side to all of this. And, as a psychologist, it's really been frustrating to hear over and over again that we're ignoring kids' mental health. And I think all of us, all 9 of us, can agree that that is not something we are ignoring. And it's something we think about 24/7 and lose sleep over. So I hope that, we can all just kind of take a breath and realize that there is much more to mental health, and that, we're in a pandemic and there's people dying, and we can't ignore how that affects people as well.
Thank you, Dr. Kolar. Any other board members?
Dr. Howells, I don't have the raise your hand feature. Otherwise, I would do that. So I just use the physical raise your hand. I wanted to begin by thanking South Hillman School for their contribution to upgrading the playground. That's a really exciting step for the South community, and I appreciate their contribution. It's been significant. And the second thing I wanted to mention, again, without going into more than what Mrs. Roberts and Dr. Kolar have mentioned, I want to recognize the death of the bus driver and also let the community as well as the board know that we are working closely with STA and the Office of Public Health to figure out what may have gone wrong and what can actually go better. So we have a meeting tomorrow with management, and we will continue to partner with them in an effort to bring about improvements and correct things that maybe were not being upheld to the degree that they should have been or in the ways that we would expect. But we will open up those lines of communication, partner with them, and help them to realize the expectations more clearly moving forward. But I also want to express my sincerest condolences for the loss of Lynn Himes as somebody that our children got to know, and we certainly appreciated the service of. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Russell. Any other board members?
Dr. Howes, I just wanted to make sure that we did announce the executive session.
I had it in my notes here.
Okay.
That was what I was going to do. I'm going to make sure I do it. And I just wanted to, unless anybody else has anything, I just had two brief things before that. And, just to echo some of what's been said, and just so folks are aware, when the meeting began, I purposely referred to Lynn Himes as the bus driver because it was 6:30 at night. And, parents who might be, attending the meeting suddenly learn her name there. And, there's some kids who somewhere in this district who are going to get on a bus Wednesday morning and not have their bus driver. So, that's why I simply referred to her as the bus driver earlier. But thank you for those who have in fact said her name and acknowledged who she was. The other thing, and I apologize, there's just so many things you roll into. I wanted to circle back and just put this in the minds of board members, especially because Mrs. Lester's, moving on, and she typically took the lead on the Martin Luther King Day of Service. In my professional life, there's an awful lot I do to promote citizenship and civic engagement, and there is absolutely nothing the research shows that promotes that in students more than service learning. So it's an important thing. I think we have to figure out ways not only to continue with MLK Day, but where else can we sort of move it through our curriculum and community. So that's it, just a thought. And then lastly, as Mr. Schubers was pointing out, I realized I hadn't done it earlier. We did, as a board, meet an executive session before the meeting to talk about legal matters related to some tax appeals. That is it. Unless there's anything else for the good of the order, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Have a great night.